Okay, good evening, everyone. Today is September 20th, and I'll bring this meeting of the Chanhassen Planning Commission to order. A few reminders before we begin. The Planning Commission is a recommending body to the City Council. We suggest you follow an item with the City Council for any final actions. On tonight's agenda, there are two public hearings and one general business item. The public hearings include a subdivision and variances for 581 Fox Hill Drive and a shoreland setback and variances for 3609 Red Cedar Point Road. Any person aggrieved of the recommendations on a variance request may appeal the recommendation made by the Planning Commission. Appeals must be filed within 4 days of said recommendation. The general business item is a revised short-term rental code amendment. Public input will be accepted when the Planning Commission opens the public hearing portion of an item. Any persons present wishing to speak must come up to the podium, state their name and address for the record before they begin. Items before the Planning Commission will be reviewed using the following format. First, I will introduce the item. Staff will then make a presentation of the report. I will open the public hearing for public input. We'll hear that public input, and then I will close the public hearing. Commission members may make comments, ask questions, or make motions. So with that, I will call for our first item, a public hearing on 581 Fox Hill Drive, and turn it over to Charmaine.
Chairman Van Oven, members of the Planning Commission, the application before you is for a subdivision of 2.47 acres into 4 lots and 1 outlot, and a 50-foot right-of-way variance. The city code requires a 60-foot right-of-way. The site is located south of Fox Hill Drive, west of Carver Beach Road, and west of Lotus Lake, east of Carver Beach Road. This application appeared before you on July 19th. The Planning Commission reviewed and tabled action on this application. The applicant was directed to examine alternatives to reduce the tree removal on this site. Briefly, currently there is an existing house on Lot 1, Block 1. The applicant intends to demolish this home. The 4 lots meet the minimum requirements for lot area, depth, width of the single-family residential district, which is what this site is zoned. And at this point, I would like to turn it over to Eric to address engineering and infrastructure.
All right, thanks, Charmaine. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, it's good to see you all again. For the audience, my name is Eric Henriksen. I'm the project engineer with the city. I'll be essentially re-reviewing some of the things we went over last time regarding access right-of-way, street connectivity, and then the municipal services in the area for the subdivision. Staff on the initial recommendation on the preliminary plat was recommending dedication of right-of-way to meet the neighborhood, the surrounding right-of-way, which would be a 50-foot dedication of right-of-way. Typically, a city code or ordinance requires that any new street is 60-foot in right-of-way, and that's why you're seeing a variance for the 50-foot dedication of the new extension of the public street here. Additionally, there was a 10-foot dedication provided by the applicant off Fox Hill Drive Road, as well as a total of 30-foot dedication on Carver Beach Road to have those corridors meet the 50-foot right-of-way recommendation. Based on some comments that we received, I think it's beneficial to kind of go over the difference between right-of-way and streets or roads, essentially. Right-of-way is an easement area, essentially. It is not the actual street width itself. The street is 95% of the time always within the right-of-way and would be less wide than the actual dedication itself. And it isn't indicative of, and I know one of the concerns of why it was tabled was to kind of look at tree loss and whatnot. So, for example, in the proposal, we have a dedication of 30-foot right-of-way along Carver Beach Road. That does not, with the proposal, mean that that's 30 feet of tree loss, essentially. So I just wanted to provide that clarification between a right-of-way, which is an easement, and a street. But again, the updated materials that we received from the applicant addressed all recommendations for right-of-way dedication on the resubmittal. Again, a history of this neighborhood and this neck of the woods when it comes to how this road got planned for, essentially. Before you today is the Fox Hill Drive subdivision, which is highlighted here in green and which Charmaine indicated in her slides, where the street connectivity or the need for the street connectivity was identified was back in 2005 with a meets and bounds known as the Eidsness meets and bounds. In 2005, the Eidsness subdivision spurred the conversation of how to appropriately plan for street connectivity as well as potential ghost plats of lots and whatnot. With the Eidsness meets and bounds, there was a roadway easement that was secured, a 50-foot roadway easement, which generally does still align with what Lotus Woods in 2020 showed and dedicated on their final plat. So within this segment here where the red dotted line is, we do have platted right-of-way. As with the Fox Hill Drive subdivision, what we're requiring of them, Lotus Woods was also also provided an exhibit which indicated the feasibility of the road connection, which was grading, the alignment itself, all of which were reviewed and found to be adequate for where that right-of-way was platted. Again, this was identified as a needed street connectivity due to fire and emergency services in order to access the neighborhood, to have a redundant access in case there's an emergency down on the other road. So again, this is something that has been planned for or discussed at least through all of these approvals since 2005. One other note I think that's important is one of the recommendations was to have the street constructed to the maximum extent feasible with this subdivision. The applicant has provided updated plans that show that feasibility and that extent. And it is recommended that it be constructed at this time and not at a later date. There are several reasons, one of which is outlined in the report regarding escrows and the difficulty of getting the correct security amount in order to secure the construction of a street and when you don't know when it's going to go through. But then also impacts if these lots are established, essentially you have residents living there, and in 15 years if the road, if or when the road connects, you're going to be constructing a street in kind of an established, next to established homes, which can be not ideal for those residents as well. So it's better to just install the street at that time. This is again another, I'll go over this quickly here. This is just to show they do have adequate sanitary sewer and water services to the site. One requirement of this subdivision would be to extend a public water main along the street alignment. This is to connect to another extension of public water main that was extended with the Lotus Woods subdivision. This would create a redundant loop of the water main, which helps with fire service, water quality, and just serviceability to the lots if there's ever maintenance issues or the like. So just wanted to note that that's still within the plans. But again, they do have adequate services to municipal water and sanitary. With that, I'll hand it to Joe.
So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the proposed drainage design. The proposed design largely maintains the existing drainage patterns on the lot. There's a high point located near the center of the property. Stormwater into the existing condition is routed to an existing wetland, which naturally overflows onto the public roadway and across Carver Beach Road, where it is captured by public infrastructure and routed to some downstream BMPs. It ultimately discharges to Lotus Lake. Drainage to the east of the high point largely makes it directly into Lotus Lake. The proposed condition is showing 4 underground infiltration BMPs, or best management practices, that function to treat stormwater before it is discharged downstream. One of the the changes from the past design that I'd like to highlight is that there was an above-ground basin located on Block 2, Lot 2, right about here, that was converted into a underground system, which I assume was done to save trees. I would note that the local surface water management plan encourages a regional treatment approach. I do think with the specific site that's rather difficult, just based on the grading and the hill being, or the high point being near the center of the lot, to get all the stormwater treatment into one location. However, I do believe it's feasible to modify the design to perhaps eliminate one or two of these treatment points to help the site be into better compliance with our local service management plan. And I would note that also might serve to potentially save some additional trees. When I was doing my review of this design, there was a few drainage issues that I found that I would like to highlight here that we are asking the applicant to look into and revise and improve their design before the final plat submittal. One would be, currently there's stormwater being generated from Lot 1, Block 2, that is private in nature from the private home, and it goes into a system that also takes on stormwater, highlighted in blue here, from the public roadway. So essentially you're combining the treatment of public and private stormwater, and that muddies the water when we're looking at trying to figure out whose onus it is to maintain that. So as such, we would ask that the system be redesigned to separate those two systems out. The other issue that I found here is that there is a need for some additional analysis to be done on the lot just south of Block 1, Lot 1. So there's an existing home here. There's quite a bit of grading that's being done by the proposed development, and we would ask that the applicant submit additional information and analysis so that we confirm that the change in drainage patterns caused by this project would not adversely impact this property. The third issue that I would like to highlight is the current design is showing stormwater infrastructure. That's this red line work here. It's essentially a small storm sewer system, and it outlets directly behind the curb line. So it's an apron outlet right behind the curb line, and as such, during rain events or whenever that basin or that area fills up with stormwater, it's going to discharge directly across the public roadway. So I imagine that being a safety concern in two different situations. One would be during kind of a heavy storm event where you just have rushing water across the roadway, and the other one would be during like a freeze-thaw cycle. So in the spring and fall, when you have cold conditions at night, you have water running across the roadway, it freezes and can cause issues. So as such, the potential solution to that would be to extend the public infrastructure that exists. So these purple arrows are showing, or this purple line work is existing infrastructure. The red is their current proposed. Blue is one possible solution where essentially they're just hard connecting those systems together. So it would be on the applicant to extend that public infrastructure, connect in, and that would alleviate that concern. So as such, there's kind of two big conditions from a water resources perspective that I'm asking the applicant and the Planning Commission to approve, and those would be that the applicant work with engineering and water resources staff to improve the design based on our comments and the geotechnical analysis that they're getting, and that the applicant receive conditional approval from the watershed district prior to final plat submittal. And with that, I will turn it over to Jill.
Thanks, Joe.
All right, tree preservation. As we all know, this is a heavily wooded site, has 95% coverage, canopy cover on the site. It's a mix of red oak and sugar maple on the site, typical big woods forest. And in a property like this, when you have such high coverage for a low density residential area, city code requires that a minimum 55% coverage be maintained after development. In this case, the applicant is proposing to have a 38% coverage after development. This is allowed by code. When a developer goes below the minimum required, they take a penalty of 1.2 times the difference between the required minimum and the proposed minimum. When that calculation is done, you get a new canopy area, and then that is divided by our standard square footage for a tree, which is 1,089 square feet. So in this case, the developer is going below the minimum required, but is replanting trees. And by replanting those trees, they bring their minimum back up to 55% according to the city's calculations. So what they've proposed is allowed under city code. They were asked to go back to the drawing board and try to find ways in which more tree preservation could be done on the lot. And as Joe stated, they took the above-ground stormwater BMP and made it an underground stormwater BMP on Lot 2, which did save canopy cover in that area and also provided a nice forested wetland buffer for the wetland area. And this area, staff is requesting, and I think the applicant has also proposed that it be covered under a conservation easement. So that would be a preserved area in perpetuity. The lots 1 through 3, block 2, have all appeared to have maximized tree preservation, trying to minimize tree removal as much as possible. There's not a lot of excess room around the building pads or for yards. So that has done a good job of tree preservation on those lots. The roadway is the roadway. That can't really change much. It is a set right-of-way and set pavement width. Moving forward, besides Lot 1, Block 1, I don't know that there's much, other ways to do it. The only other thing would be, as Joe stated, possibly combining stormwater BMPs to reduce, again, on some of the lots, that area that's taken out for stormwater management. Let's see. So the green highlighted area is the approximate area that would be covered by a conservation easement on the property. And those trees, conservation easements in Chanhassen, those trees would be protected in perpetuity. Any of the remaining forested areas on the lots would not have a conservation easement. So property owners have the right to kind of do what they want after the houses go in. But the protected area under the easement would be there forever. So, Charmaine?
The city code and the comprehensive plan requires parks to be located within half a mile of a site. There are 2 parks that will be serving the subject site. At your last meeting, the Planning Commission closed the public hearing. At this time, you have the option of taking additional comments from the public. We just needed to point this out. Staff is recommending approval of this application. It meets all of the requirements of the subdivision and zoning ordinance regulations. The variance for the width of the right-of-way was directed by staff to reduce the amount of grading overall on the site and to remain consistent with the characteristics of Carver Beach. Staff is available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you,
Thank
Charmaine.
you.
Questions for staff?
I have a question. Why the need for the road to go through the middle of those lots?
Okay.
Thank you, Kelsey. That is a good question. I'm going to go back to an exhibit, I think, which hopefully will illustrate the lack of connectivity for emergency services in the area. So it pretty much arrives at this point. You don't have a redundant way of getting to residents along this corridor here if there was an emergency in that area. Street connectivity, usually you want to have some sort of redundant access to lots if there is an emergency and there was a failure at some point within these corridors. It's, one of those things where we plan for the worst, or I think fire and emergency services thinks that way or plans that way essentially. If there was a storm or an event where you had inaccessibility through this route for whatever reason, a tree or some other event that happened, and you had an emergency where they needed to get to somewhere here where minutes matter, that can take time to get here. So even from 2005, that was recognized where when these lots develop, having a street here would provide a redundant access. It's similar to the concept with looping water mains and things like that when you're trying to provide service in emergency situations or maintenance situations. So that was the recommendation from staff, previous staff and current staff.
Eric, is this a public road or a private road?
This would be a public road. It's either against code or it's not recommended to have private streets connect to public streets. There's a lot of issues that can arise with something like that, where private property owners own a street connecting to public streets, and you could have potential cut-through. I wouldn't see a lot of cut-through in this neighborhood, but it comes down to maintenance and ownership issues. Private streets are technically located on private property. Right-of-way is an easement that I explained earlier, which facilitates the public's right to use that easement for access. So this would be a public street.
Thank you.
Are there right-of-ways on the other two lots that are shown? Not the Fox Hill, not the Lotus Woods. Do the right-of-ways exist?
No, not at this time. So as you see from the exhibit on the right, this was the concept from Lotus Woods that shows the alignment that was chosen to show feasibility, essentially grades, all that kind of stuff. These lots are not proposing development or any subdivisions, so we typically don't take right-of-way in those situations. It's when future development occurs. That right-of-way would be extended when that development occurs. So just for, I guess, we did provide, this is the 2005 concept that was originally looked at with the IDESNES meets and bounds. Again, another concept. The idea here is, the city and developers, you try to plan for the future and kind of to ensure future lots aren't landlocked, that they are developable to ensure those property rights remain. So this is an example of kind of the initial kind of look. And what you can see here is this right-of-way, again, was initially shown with the easement, but then when Lotus Woods came in, they platted it. Platted right-of-way is easier to manage and keep track of than roadway easements. But this is the concept, again, from 2005 for reference.
So in theory, if those two lots never subdivide, the right-of-way won't exist?
Correct.
Okay.
I have a question for Jill. Jill, could you go back to the conservation easement slide that you showed, that one? It appears that the conservation easement is going to bleed over into Lot 2 and Lot 3, private property, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so over the course of time, how is it possible to protect that conservation easement from either the first owner or the second or the third or the fourth owner? Is there going to be some markings or a fence or something to identify this space as a conservation easement?
Yes, in the past we have put up or required developers to put up signs saying it's a conservation easement. It's also on building permit surveys. Copies are sent to homeowners if we feel that they, as time goes on and maybe property owners change, we've contacted them and let them know. But a lot of times in neighborhoods like that, legacy is verbally passed on from one owner to the next as well. But yeah, signage seems to be a one effective way to keep track of it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Jill, while you're there, just a clarifying question for you. So I understand the minimum exists, and then if a property goes below that minimum, they can plant their way back to the minimum. Is there a bottom, or can I raise the whole place and plant my way back to?
Technically, in a subdivision, yes, you could, say a property starts even under the minimum. I mean, we have properties where maybe,
Sure, of course.
right? You
Yep,
have maybe it's a 2-acre lot and there's just a couple trees on it.
Totally.
So you don't even meet the minimum to begin with, and those trees are in the middle. You have to cut those trees down. So basically, you've clear cut the lot.
Right.
So yes, you can go to the bottom and work your way up.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Is there a minimum caliper inch replacement requirement?
2.5 inches diameter.
And in your experience, typically what do developers plant?
2.5 inches diameter.
Even though they might remove a tree that's, 200 years old?
Yep,
Yep.
yep.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Other questions for staff?
I kind of want to go back to the road, honestly. So if
You just want to see Eric back in
yeah, I do. Yeah. Sorry to jump all over the place.
No,
So-
it's appreciated.
So just to clarify, I feel like this issue might present some confusing points to, if we're not super in the weeds on it. So the redundancy problem identified could potentially not be resolved for 100 years if we don't actually build a road through those two lots in the middle, right? And could continue to exist in perpetuity.
It could. It could. I would have. The city has never really been in the business of taking right away. There is. I guess the simple answer is yes. That could be the case.
So I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around, maybe some other folks are too, until the actual physical street itself could be built, what is the point of the right-of-way existing partially? Until the two roads can actually be connected? Does that question make sense?
If the city doesn't secure the right-of-way easement at that time, there's no other opportunity to have a right-of-way easement. It's baked into when you have a subdivision, essentially. Right-of-way acquisition can occur at that time. So if right-of-way was stricken from this application, that right-of-way, there's a 99.9% chance the city would never obtain that to facilitate that needed future connection.
And then finally, is there a way by which no leveling, no stub, I think the term has been stub street, can be put in until, again, you can actually connect the two roads because you've achieved right-of-way through all the properties? Essentially, could the right-of-way that we are partitioning off here be left untouched until such time you could actually build a road that connected the two streets?
Yes, that is a possibility. With Lotus Woods to the south, the reason why it was, and actually this image, you can kind of see it here, a street intersection was constructed. Essentially, that's what we call a stub. Usually there's a sign at the end of it that says future road extension, so that kind of alerts the neighborhood, so there's a expectation sent. With Lotus Woods, it was reviewed and looked at to have that road extended. However, the feasibility of it, you would have only gotten 20 additional feet. So it wasn't adequate enough to be extended to the point to the property line. When you extend a road to the property line, then the next developer builds from that point. It's kind of similar to your extension of sanitary sewer or water mains, where you extend to your property line, then the next developer or development can pick up from that point and extend those needed services. But to your point, can that be yes, technically it can. Again, one of the issues with that, and what will happen, I believe, with Lotus Woods, and in my opinion, there was security captured from the developer for the future construction of that street, whether the city would construct that or a future developer. That escrow would then go to one of those two entities. It's very difficult to estimate the appropriate amount. We can get a current dollar amount for what that cost is going to be to build the street, and that is usually what is captured. However, if it is not constructed for 15 years, that current dollar value loses value over the course of time. And if you capture $45,000, if that's what the engineer's estimate is to build that section, and in 15 years, that $45,000 is what would be presented, and it might not be adequate at the time. So the idea is, if you construct those streets, you can mitigate that cost difference, essentially. You're not going to have users really using it. There's not as much degradation as a typical road, so it should hold up a little better. But also, it as I kind of mentioned previously, the construction is complete at that time. So the surrounding neighborhood and those two lots that are being proposed won't be impacted for the construction of a street as they would be established homes then. In this kind of development, what happens is the street goes in first before anyone lives in those lots. So it's kind of one and done, and then it's completed. There's a finality to it, essentially.
Eric, I have a question. I'm sorry, Charmaine, go ahead.
I just want to add to what Eric said and the importance of the right-of-way. If at any point in the future, we're talking 20 years from now, if either one of those parcels decided to subdivide, if we don't have the right-of-way from the north, basically the only option is to come through the stub street or off of Carver Beach Road, and you have to create a cul-de-sac situation. The cul-de-sac bubble takes up a lot of vegetation. Just something to keep in the back of your mind as you're evaluating the application.
I think that's a valid point, where you do have to have adequate turnarounds. So you're pushing kind of, I don't know if you're actually trading horses there, but if there's a cul-de-sac situation, though, I would like to just make the point clear that does not and would not solve the issue of street connectivity in the redundant system. And that, again, is, I think, the big push for this connection when it comes to, I think, emergency services view on life and safety for the residents.
Okay, so just one concluding question on it then. So I understand that perspective. It sounds like the countering perspective might be that if we do the street first or the stub first and just do it now, like bullet point 4 on this slide, street to be built in conjunction with the subdivision to the maximum extent feasible, you potentially have now asphalt that's gone in that serves no purpose for potentially a really long time. Is that, I guess, so I'm trying to wrap my head around that counterpoint, and if that's a legitimate counterpoint or concern or not.
It would not facilitate the connection at this time. That's correct. It would probably also be the city's maintenance stance that we wouldn't maintain it either. So we wouldn't have wasted efforts on plowing, for instance, or if for some reason it was 20 years down the road and that's kind of a mill and overlay life cycle for a road, we wouldn't probably mill and overlay it either. So it would, correct, if it doesn't connect, it would not serve the purpose for the connection, which that's the purpose of the extension, but, yeah.
Eric, the lack of redundancy that you mentioned regarding Fox Hill Drive's subdivision, isn't the same thing true with Lotus Woods and Idnes Metz?
It was recognized at that time, and that's why the city recommended the right-of-way to facilitate that connection, which has been captured through that plat.
Okay, but why, just out of curiosity, why didn't the city require that through road to be built at that time to serve the redundancy purpose that you mentioned for
So-
those two subdivisions?
Yeah, so that was an existing lot. It's a lot of record from, it could have even been, I don't even know if it was platted, to be honest. I don't know if this area has been platted, so I would consider it a very old lot. Why it wasn't constructed at that time is, again, we did not have right-of-way connecting Fox Hill Drive to Big Woods Drive. So in order to, when Lotus Woods subdivision was in order for that connection to be facilitated, there would have had to have been a right-of-way take by the city on those 3 lots, because Fox Hill Drive obviously was not up for subdivision at that time. And it would have had to facilitate it would have had to take right away from this lot, and this lot to facilitate the connection. So again, just, we're not going to seize or take right away without a subdivision, essentially. So it's just orderly development. Someone subdivides, there's a need that's found, plan for that future connection was the I think the line of train of thought on that.
Thank you.
Eric, a little bit more on this. The Lotus Woods subdivision through route, the northern portion of it is to the west of the Fox Hill subdivision through route. I'm just curious. Obviously, the Fox Hill has moved it to the east, and that affects the lot directly south of the Fox Hill Drive. How do we get input on that from that owner? Doesn't it matter? I mean, it seems like there's an interest here that needs to be brought into this conversation as to where that through route crosses that property. Can you explain to me how we gather that information and how it was considered?
I know through the lens of engineering, we look at function, right? If you're showing, or a proposal is showing, that the through connection is going to be feasible, again, it's going to be ordinance and the requirements of a road construction. I know that's the lens we look at it through. What concept plans show, I think, is kind of how those areas can be developed. So when it comes to ghost platting, I don't think, if you're ghost platting something, typically they're lots that you can't develop, so you're just showing the possibility of how those lots can develop. With this, the only requirement that the city is looking for, again, at least from the engineering perspective, is that to ensure that the alignments, grades, and utilities kind of work through that corridor. I don't know, Charmaine, if you have any insights on neighboring properties and those kind of things when it comes to ghost platting, but.
So one of the things that we always look at is the potential for future subdivision of neighboring properties. And in this case, we also wanted to make sure that there is adequate setbacks for the existing homes should they decide to keep their existing homes and not demolish and build new ones. We also looked at the fact that there is a wetland on this site. So is there adequate buildable area between the future right-of-way and the existing environmental features? The existing homes, will they have adequate lot area? Because these are riparian lots, they need to maintain an area of minimum 20,000 square feet. And with the proposed alignment, we know that this parcel will have approximately 33,000 square feet. We look at it from the point that should there be a subdivision, is this alignment possible? And the answer is yes.
But for,
One of-
for clarification,
Yeah.
is it possible for that lot immediately south of Fox Hill Drive, could that owner with the alignment of the road build 4 houses or not?
They can build potentially 2 additional homes. We still need to see what the frontage is along Carver Beach Road. So where this road ends up, there is a parcel that could potentially be located along the western portion of the yellow alignment.
But I guess my question is, with the alignment that's shown, is that reducing the number of homes that could be built on
No.
that parcel?
No, because regardless, let's take the red alignment. You have 1 home that is a riparian lot, another one that will back up to the wetland, and then depending on what the frontage is along Carver Beach Road, that will determine whether they can have another lot or not.
Thank you.
Other questions for staff? Okay. If the applicant is here and would like to present any of the new information, you're welcome to do so. You can also waive that right. Totally up to you.
So thank you for meeting on this again. We weren't able to be here last time, but we are the owners of 581 Fox Hill. So I'm Maria, this is Andy.
Hello.
We've lived in Carver County for a long time, raised our kids here at this point. The reason
17 years.
17 years. The reason we weren't here last time is we were on a graduation trip with our son that we had planned well in advance. He graduated from Chaska High School. So we live in that community right now and are very excited, you know, when we purchased this lot, hoping to build our dream home there. So it isn't just a matter of like this being a subdivision and developers coming in and all of that. We have invested so much time and so much energy into trying to make this a perfect place. And we very much love the trees. I want everyone to know that we very much value that. In fact, we tapped those trees for maple syrup this year, and that was quite a process. A lot of sap, a little syrup, but it was really interesting to learn. But I think that what we want everyone to know is we have done everything we think we possibly can to save as many trees on this property as is feasible, really, for us with what we're trying to do here. And I enjoyed meeting with Jill. We went out and we walked the property. I also learned about the big woods. I do think that from speaking with Jill, there can be some benefits to planting new generation growth with some of these forests. It isn't just about taking down trees that are old. It's also about planting new trees for the future. So I just hope that people can remember that. I think some of the questions you guys had in relation to the road are questions we also have as the homeowners. We know from going back to the drawing board and trying to figure out how can we save as many trees as possible, that road will take, we could increase the canopy by 8%. That's a lot. We could increase the tree canopy by 8% if that road was not required to be built. It's also difficult because we are a couple with a small subdivision here. This is not a massive subdivision, and we're being asked to, build this road, pay for this road. It's very expensive to build this road. We have 2 kids in college. We'll have 2 kids in college that we're also paying for. It's just difficult, and we really are trying to do our very best. There are a lot of people to please in this equation. There's what we want, what the city requires, what engineering is, what we need to do for the trees, what the watershed has to have. And I hope everyone understands that we are trying to navigate all of this as best as possible. So, we're excited that we're at the point where, this is being recommended for approval. I just want you guys to know we take this very seriously and we worked really hard to try to get to this point. So, I don't know if you had anything
Yeah,
additional
I
to
was just
add.
gonna say, when it comes to the road, I know there are some concerns from some people in the neighborhood about the number of trees, and I wish there was a way to save more trees, and not requiring that road is a way to save more trees. And there is no redundancy now, there won't be any redundancy after we build it, and there may never be. And I think that we would be willing to still give the right of way if we didn't have the requirement that we gotta cut down trees and lay asphalt now. And I
And pay for that,
understand.
like
and
road,
pay for
it's
that.
really hard, it's a
Well,
hard pill to swallow.
And I understand that, if we are required to put the money in escrow, it might not be worth as, the road may cost a lot more 15 years, 20 years from now, but a road that goes in now and sits there for 15 and 20 years is gonna need a lot of work done to it in 15 or 20 years to make it usable. So what's the difference there? Let's save the trees now.
So that being said, if we have to build the road, we understand that. We understand the redundancy, we understand the planning for the future, we understand all of those things too. So it's back to my original point, and my background is as an investigative journalist. That is what I do for a living. I'm used to looking at every side. I want everybody to be objective. I want to be able to look at all different parts of this equation, and that's what we're really trying to do. In addition, I think just a few other things that I would point out. There's been a question why 4 houses or what. There's a lot of different factors that go into this. I would point out that when we started looking into this process, there are already utilities stubbed for 4 properties on this road that were in existence before we even got here. So this has been in the works for a while. This parcel is also longer than the block, or than the opposing side, I guess, of Fox Hill, the opposite side of Fox Hill. Will have fewer homes on this longer parcel, plus this dedicated wetland area and conservation area than they have on that side of the block currently. So we really are trying to do our very best. And so I would just point those things out. I think that we're happy to come back here and say that we were able to save more trees. That was the goal. So I think in the end, it was good that we got that opportunity to re-examine this. So thank you for that. I think that, I'm not sure I have anything else specific to say. Certainly all the key questions, I think, for the developer here and for Alliant, who've been great partners with us this whole time. I think they can address any of those. And it's been wonderful working with your planning team, too, to try to even get to this point. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the owners?
Yes.
Or the developer?
I have a question. Assuming that you could get fair market value for your property, in the grand scheme of things, would you consider selling it to the county, the city, to the Nature Conservancy, or Sierra Club, or some other organization that would preserve 100% of the canopy?
I think that there's a lot of different factors in that equation. We also have we have other people. This is also a people question. There's other people who also want to live there and that we've been planning for and all of that.
It's, there's the question of fair market value for the land, but there's also the question of the time and energy that
Yes,
Denali
and money
Alliant
and-
us have all put in
Yeah.
to this point to get it to this stage.
It's I guess my quick answer to that.
And we
would
want to
be-
live there.
we
We
yeah,
wanna live
like
on the lake. That's how this whole
So,
thing started. So
right.
it's a tricky question.
It's a
If it
tricky
came down
question.
to it and we were going to have to make additional changes that was going to make this, the whole question of 4 lots versus 3, if it comes back and it's 3 lots is all it can be, the feasibility, the cost that will go into developing this into 3 lots, especially paying for that road, start to make 3 lots not that
It's very
financially
hard.
viable. So at that point, if that was the answer and that's where we were stuck, then I think we might not have a choice but to consider doing that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm happy to be back. I just, David Beaker, Denali Custom Homes, will be the developer. I just want to address a few things from the letter that was turned into the city from the two homeowners that are south of the property to hopefully answer some of their questions and maybe help you understand a little more about what we're doing. I think that Andy and Maria well addressed the 3 lots versus 4 lots thing, so I'm not going to go over that. One thing that I did want to share with everyone is what kind of homes are going to be built here, because I think it's important, because that was addressed in the letter. And as I mentioned in the last planning commission, they are going to be, I don't see any 2-story homes. They're going to be 1.5 stories or 1 story. And so I printed out a few examples. The top example is actually one that we're already working with a couple on to put on lot 2 of block 2. But I think these are very representative. We're working with an architect out of Lake Elmo that designs smaller homes, and that is what our clients are asking for. Yes?
No, I got one just for him.
Oh, okay.
If you could place that on that Chanhassen placard.
Absolutely.
Take a look.
There we go. All right. So there you can see what we're talking about. I think that, you know, a benefit of getting this project moving forward is that these are the kind of things that we're going to see, and they're not big box 2 stories. Should we not be successful, you know, there is a potential that that kind of a builder or a developer would come in and put much larger 2-story homes to maximize what they can get out of these properties. That's not what our clients are requesting, and I can see that all 4 lots would be of this similar nature. I want to address the lot sizes, because there was a comment that they're all 1/3 lots. The Lakeshore lot is 0.66, over 1/2 acre. Lot 1 of block 2 is the smallest because it is hampered by the road that has to go in, but it also will share some of that right away, so it'll feel bigger than it actually is. That one is at 0.34 and a half. Lot 2 next to that is of block 2 is 0.52 over 1/2 acre, which is very standard in neighborhoods. And lot 3, which is the corner lot, is 0.41. So we do have one lot that is, you know, near that 1/3 of an acre, but most of them are significantly larger than that. I think we have Alliant here, and they will address the comment in the letter regarding the water runoff and that it could complicate what's going on at the neighboring property. And I know that there was some comment on that earlier, and definitely something that we want to address and make sure that, you know, we don't impact anyone else outside of the property that we're working on. And finally, the road. None of us want the road. I think everybody is willing to give the right of way. Everyone loves the trees. It could potentially be a very long time before that road ever is of any use to anyone. I understand the economics of saying that, well, we want you to build it now so it's there because roads cost more in the future, but we don't know how long that's going to be, and I honestly don't know what the city does with their money. I hope that they do something with it so that it actually makes money and doesn't just sit in an account somewhere. So hopefully that alleviates that matter. I hope that you'll continue to consider this project and see that the Oz own the property. They have a right to develop the property. We've met all the requirements with one small variance for a road that we don't want, and don't need, and that we will replace the trees and get back up to that percentage. And I think Seth might be able to address. We look at canopies here in Chanhassen, but in other areas they do tree counts. And if you look at the tree count of counts versus canopy, it's a little more interesting that there's a higher amount of actual trees being saved versus the canopy coverage. if you look at it as a percentage. So, does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Eric indicated that the purpose of this road is, among other things, for safety purposes, redundancy.
Yep.
So assume for a moment that the road wasn't built and a fire occurred, or somebody had a heart attack and an ambulance was called, and there was a problem on Fox Hill Drive. Who would you hold to account for the fact that that emergency service vehicle couldn't get to the property in time to save a life or save a house?
Sure, and I would answer that by when the road is able to go through all three properties, because there's three properties, two other property owners have to decide to develop and decide to give up part of their land to sell to someone else. But until those two properties do anything, whether the road is there or not does not affect anyone's safety. You will not have the redundancy that you're looking for. So it would, to me, make a lot more sense to dedicate the area, and have it available for a road in the future, have money escrowed for that road to be built sometime in the future, but not build the road until you can actually build it all the way through, because it's not helping anyone at this point.
Question for staff. Eric, is it possible to escrow an amount of money based on the engineering estimate for the cost of the road, plus 5 years, 10 years out, accounting for inflation or whatever? So that instead of dumping $45,000 for what the road will cost today, you require that they put in $60,000 or $75,000. And if it only costs $70,000, you give them back $5,000. Is that possible?
I would answer that by I have not seen that occur within the city. Granted, I've only been here 4 years, but researching subdivisions back to the 70s, I haven't seen and further than that I should say, but I haven't seen an attempt to try to estimate a timeline on when a street might go through. I would add the practice of constructing a street prior to a connectivity happening is not extraordinary. There's multiple examples within the city where street connections are stubbed, they're extended to the property line to facilitate future development. It's been a common practice for many years. There's multiple subdivisions within the city. I could show examples of this practice. But to the question of trying to estimate or make it onus on the developer to try to account for future money value, I haven't seen that attempted, and I guess I wouldn't know what the path forward would be with that. That's maybe a conversation with finance, or again, I just haven't seen that occur.
And from an emergency vehicle access perspective, how serious a concern is that from the city's perspective?
Enough to require the right of way and to recommend that the connection happen.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, thank you. Okay.
I'll just quickly.
Who are you?
Seth. I'm sure you remember me from last time.
I remember you. Yeah. Welcome back.
Seth Logan with Alliant here on behalf of the Denali and Oz. Just quickly, I want to cover the concern in the citizens letter about the wetland. It's going to be tough for you guys to see here, but this wetland here, most of the perimeter of the wetland is at an elevation of 949. The EOF for this wetland at existing occurs at a 949.45, allowing for runoff to occur almost immediately. There isn't a lot of ponding depth in this wetland, and the elevations on the south side of it here are 956, 954, 952. So in order for it to flood up and go to the property on the south, it would have to flood up 6 feet. At existing, currently it floods out to the road overland, which is what we were proposing. We will continue to work with city staff to improve that condition as part of their approvals. And then Eric, would you mind bringing up that concept drawing? Charmaine thinks. Just kind of talk quick about. The difference between, yeah. No, the red and the yellow stub road alignments or the connectivity. We proposed to move the stub road connection to the east to allow for maximum tree savings. If you keep that red alignment, you have a 25-foot wetland setback and then a 25-foot wetland buffer, 30-foot wetland setback, and a 30-foot front setback. It more or less makes that lot undevelopable on the east or the west side of that red line. So we propose to move it to allow for maximum developability of that lot. I can tell you from looking at this, there isn't the frontage required on Carver Beach Road to put a third lot there. That would obviously require a variance through development or the properties to develop together. And then, yes, as David stated, we are, if you look at it from a caliper inch perspective versus the tree canopy, which is how Chanhassen, which is how we calculated it, we are more in the range of 45%, I believe, tree savings versus the 38, which we are via canopy coverage.
With the road.
Great.
With the road, correct. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Any questions? All right. Perfect, thank you. So at this point, as Charmaine noted, we have the choice. I will make the choice to open the public hearing. What I would ask of the public is that if you have already made a comment on this issue through a previous meeting, I have poured over the notes from the last meeting. So if on the new information or on the changes you have a public comment to make, I would love to hear those. So with that, I'll open the public hearing and invite anyone from the public to join us at the podium.
My name is Paige Will, and we live on Big Woods Boulevard. We've been friends with Andy and Maria for 17, 18 years. We were neighbors with them in Chaska, and they're wonderful people. They're wonderful neighbors. I have no doubt that they will do absolutely an amazing job if they are allowed to go forward with this development. That said, living on Big Woods Boulevard, I have concerns about the road. We enjoy living on a quiet cul-de-sac. There are lots of kids there. This is a neighborhood without sidewalks and very narrow roads. And I just think by putting that road in, especially, I mean, it just doesn't make sense to do it prematurely. If they're willing to do, put it in the paperwork and put an escrow, I think it makes sense to do that. It doesn't make sense to add more pavement to the neighborhood, to dig up more of the neighborhood. I think most of the people in this room are really passionate about the neighborhood, as are we. We actually live on a conservation easement. I've had Jill up to our house to get permission to take down a dead tree. So I take that very seriously for us. But I just think it doesn't make sense to put that road in right now. We live on Big Woods Boulevard, and so if you're talking about emergency situations, we're the ones that are going to not have the best emergency, and it's worked fine so far. The biggest problem in our neighborhood is every time a tree limb goes down, our power goes out, so because they're all above ground. So if you're going to change anything in the neighborhood, that would be where I would recommend doing
Welcome
that.
to Jane.
Yes, we do love it. We moved there for the woods. I couldn't get my husband to move anywhere until we found this neighborhood, so glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny.
Hi, my name is Francesca Landon, and I'm at 620 Fox Hill, so I'm right above the word hill. I hope I don't mention anything I previously mentioned. I'm so happy to hear that nobody wants the road. So, yay. Eric, I was going to say, I don't think your question was fully answered before. I know that both of the people that live along the lake are not interested in a road either. But I do have a question regarding that, the development of the road. I just need clarification. So it was mentioned that you guys, when those homes are developed, does that mean actually physically developed, or is that when you guys, or when there's change of ownership, that road will be able to go in?
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Please, go ahead.
What that means is the property owner, either current or a future property owner, would have to come to the city and go through the development review process to subdivide. So it could be the current. I understand they don't want to, so it probably would not happen with that ownership. So it would have to be a willing property owner who wants to subdivide their property.
Okay. And then I noticed that a lot of the drainage conversation was directed specifically to this property. Can't remember your name, I'm sorry. Seth just mentioned the drainage and where it goes exactly. I just want to point out that on this slide, just to the right of the word big, you know, as the water comes down right in that corner where the fire hydrant is, the drainage systems are a little bit above the G. So it's almost like the water needs to go across the street. However, at the bottom of that street, there is a gravel driveway that goes to another neighbor's house, and he is way down at the bottom. So I have concerns about the water and how it's been pointed out that it goes into that way and flooding his area. So it'd be nice to hear how that's going to be handled, since I know that his property has already, as recent as last summer, the city was working on the pond in that area because of some other problems with drainage. Like I said, I didn't want to repeat anything that I had previously said, but I am also deeply concerned about after 2 months, the proposal of trees going from 35 to only 38%. I was kind of hoping that there would be a better solution. And that's pretty much it. So I hope there can be a better solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please.
Hello again.
Welcome back.
My name is Deanne and I live at 600 Box Hill Drive. And I was talking to the owner of the property on Carver Beach Road that she was just speaking about. That if we get a good rain, it comes down his gravel driveway and goes in his backyard. If you've ever been through that area, and I think you probably have, to take a look at the area, his backyard has been flooded. And this past summer, they took and they dredged the pond in back of him to help relieve some of that. He was concerned, and unfortunately he couldn't make it here tonight, so he said, can you please talk to them about the runoff, because the runoff is going to be a problem. Also, he said, the lift station. When they put in Big Woods, there was a problem with the lift station, and that's how we had sewer drainage into Lotus Lake, and we could not use Lotus Lake for a long period of time. In fact, he said a friend of his tried to go jet skiing out there, and he was chased away by armed police, saying you need to get away from this area because there was sewage. So that was his biggest concern with that. My disappointment is you said to come back with 55% tree coverage. They came back with 36, I believe, with a planting of 19 trees that are 2.5 inches. Now, I think you have received information from someone who belongs to the Sierra Club, and she and her husband went out and measured the diameter of many of the trees. A lot of the trees are well over 100 years old, some of them encroaching to 200. The increase of trees that we have seen on the plot shows that most of the increase is around the conservation area. That's not where most of these legacy trees are. And they have them noted on their plot where these trees are. I wish they would pay attention to some of these and try to preserve some of those. I know in building a house, you do have to take down trees. I think we need to pay special attention to some of these that are old and beautiful, and that's why they're moving here. They want to live in the woods. So why are we taking down all the woods to take and put in these 2.5-inch trees? And creating problems. Also, what about the rest of these people who live on the lake? What happened to being neighborly, talking to your neighbor about this? I don't live on the lake. I'd be very upset that you're going to take and affect my possibility of getting as much as I can when I retire and need to move away. If you're cutting away some of my land, what am I to do? I am at a disadvantage. I don't know. I think there's many factors that we need to think about this. I understand that they are investing a lot of money. This is a beautiful area. This is where they wanted to move. But I also understood from the woman who sold it to them that they were going to be good stewards of the land and they were going to try to preserve as much as they can. And from coming last time and this time, I'm not hearing that. I'm not hearing that. And especially, what is our leaf? And they're going to cut down those trees that have that leaf.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
On your first point about your neighbor who has the current flooding concerns, Jeff, is he asking that whatever solution is here to fix that, or is he more concerned that it's going to make it worse, or are we just trying to bring attention to it because it needs to be looked at?
No, he was concerned that it would make it worse for him.
Okay. But it sounds like he's got an issue already because there's already flooding
Correct.
happening with the current situation, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
No, that helps, thank you.
Yes. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. I'm just glad you all came out to take a look at it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Could I just say one more thing? I don't know if I can or not.
Please.
I just wanted to say just one more thing. So I think first of all, she said it was 36% and it's not, it was 38. And I know that 3% may seem like a small amount to some people. We have tried to work with every single thing we could related to what the watershed requirements are, what all of these other requirements are to get to that percentage. We are sort of hamstrung, again with the road, I'm not trying to criticize this road situation, but like we can't do anything about that big piece. There's literally nothing we can do. It's a little disturbing to me to hear that somebody had someone trespass on our property to measure the size of trees. That's kind of an issue for me, I have to be honest. But we really just want to be good neighbors for everybody. And I just wanted to just restate that we really did, this was presented and recommended for approval before. We've done even more, and it's, recommended for approval again. We're trying so hard here. So that's it. That's all I wanted to say.
Great, thank you.
Do you have time for one more question from me?
We have, yes, but we have someone who hasn't, so let's have Ella join us.
Yes, my name is Ella. I live at 600 Fox Hill Drive. I'm also your local neighborhood DoorDash driver, so you might recognize me. But I just wanted to come up and tell you guys that when the house was sold, Bob's widow had a yard sale, and I actually bought his father's life story that he used a typewriter to write it on, and I read part of it, like a lot of it. And I assure you that this was never supposed to happen. Like, this was never supposed to happen. Like, this was never supposed to be developed like this. And a lot of these trees are sugar maples, which is what our town is actually named after. And a lot of these trees are actually just as old as our town. if not older. So like if we destroy them, we'll never see them again in our lifetime, and we might never see them in this area again. It's really hard to say. When they bought the property from the widow, they did say that they were going to try and conserve it, and she had shot down other offers from people trying to develop the land as well, because she didn't want that. Like obviously she wanted to move on with her life and do other things, but she didn't want the whole place to get pimped out like it is now, unfortunately. And that's honestly the only way that I can describe it, because I just can't explain why you would put 4 homes on such a small plot and then pimp it out to all your friends to make it cheap for everybody. They plead their case to you guys, but they should really be talking to us, because you're going to have to live among us, and you're not welcome here if you're going to be like that. No, it's just sad. You're threatening our home. You're threatening our livelihood towards you guys. It's just sad. Last time when you guys had talked about how it was a travesty to like develop all that and just get rid of all the trees, it's absolutely true, and all the animals that will be displaced. Every single year we have a family of deer that live right by that pond, and you see babies, and you see turkeys, and you see fox, you see a lot of stuff, and now that place isn't going to be special. It's not going to be a home anymore. Like, how can you call it Lotus Woods when there's not going to be any trees at all? Really, it's just sad. I just wish that you guys could like look at this and see that maybe this isn't the right thing. If we wanted to really conserve, you would just build the lake house and then sell the rest to conserve it. Honestly, that'd be for the best. So I just hope you guys try to help save the trees and the land and the animals. So thank you for your time, you guys.
Thank you. It's just a very quick response. I just want everyone to know we were never misleading anyone about our intentions here. The previous owner in the marketing materials, I'm sure they're on the internet still somewhere, put forth that this land was a potential for subdivision in their real estate marketing materials, and she knew very well what our intentions were when we bought.
Thank you.
I'll just try to stay to the point with this. Tree conservation. So I know that we've had trees die on our property because they've lived out their life. And I know Jill came out to our property.
Could you come up to the microphone?
Sorry, Jill came out to our property on Big Woods Boulevard to look at some of the trees, and we had a great discussion because I learned that sometimes by taking out an old dead tree that's not thriving, you can help some of the other trees thrive and open up some sunlight and some things like that. When I walk through the neighborhood, I do observe there are a lot of trees, not just on the property that they purchased, but in the area, especially along the lake shore where the trail is. There are a lot of trees that are going down. I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm worried, Governor Abbott is paralyzed because a tree fell on him many years ago. So I do worry that, we have a lot of old trees in that neighborhood that are coming down naturally. And so I think there's this obsession with saving the trees, but there is some natural tree loss on a regular basis, particularly in that neighborhood. And I just think that's a good point to consider when we're talking about trees and replanting, and taking some out can potentially sometimes make some of them grow, and there are plenty of saplings all over the place. I don't even think we have to worry about trees replicating themselves in our neighborhood.
Thank you. Okay. With that, I will close the public portion of this and see first if any of that generated any questions, comments from my fellow commissioners. I know I have one question that I didn't think to ask staff. Maybe Eric, you can. I think the answer to this is no, but developers are never in any way required to provide a conservation easement. Am I right about that? Is that a requirement? Or was that a choice? This is a choice.
It's a Jill question.
It's a Jill question. Sorry, Eric, the engineer.
That was the long pause of why me?
It's like, get Jill here now.
No, I mean, there is nothing in our city code that requires a conservation easement. Conservation easements usually come about between city staff recommending it because there's a desirable, healthy, valuable stand of trees, and the developer offering it sometimes because they know they can protect these trees and it helps their overall canopy cover. So yes, it's not required.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Yes, Percy, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah. It's been very interesting.
Very.
First I've been called worse. It's not a problem. First, I'd like to acknowledge to the applicant that I'm grateful for small favors. Increasing the tree canopy even by 3% is a lot. From my perspective, it's not nearly enough, but you are in compliance. And so that everybody in the room understands, at least based on what my understanding is, if a property owner is in compliance, there is little, if nothing, the planning commission or the city council can do to prevent the property owner from doing what they want to do on their property. It's just that simple. And if there's somebody to point the finger to here tonight, from my perspective, it's the city of Chanhassen for not requiring a greater amount of trees to be preserved on a piece of property, especially trees of this nature in a unique neighborhood such as Carver Beach. I mean, once those trees are gone, they're gone forever, and the nature of that neighborhood is going to be unalterably changed. It'll be different. I'm not saying it's going to be better or worse, but it's going to be significantly changed forever, and I think that's unfortunate. You know, that said, I'm sure that these applicants will do the very best job they can to build on their property the nicest homes that they can, and do what they can to make it a pleasant thing to do. But it's unfortunate that the city doesn't require some way of preserving such a unique neighborhood as the Carver Beach area on Fox Hill Drive. So thank you.
Yes, sir.
Do you want to go next? You go?
No.
Okay. Okay, a couple points, I guess, before we get to the end of this conversation. One, I wanted to flush out some of the points, or at least one of the main points brought up in one of the letters received, I think, on 9/16 by folks who probably weren't, I don't think, here during the public hearing session. And it was under the impression it might be the owners of the two properties in the middle of this equation between the green and purple. But one of the points that struck me in there was the adverse impact of the right-of-way on the potential future value of their properties, especially if we're taking the route that's yellow instead of the originally planned route that is red. It seems to more adversely impact the property directly to the south of Fox Hill Drive subdivision than the other one. But that being said, do we have, I guess I haven't heard perspective shared on that, I guess from staff or potentially from others on the commission. I'm just trying to get my arms around, gosh, it really feels like we are kind of limiting and cutting into that property's future value in terms of the number of, or in terms of the size of that lot between the right-of-way and the lake, as opposed to what it used to be under the red line. And I hope that makes sense, and I don't know what comment I'm asking for from the city, but do we give consideration to potentially the negative impacts to that property owner in order to have more positive impacts for the property owners before us today?
Could I maybe offer a comment? And it might help, or you might just say, no, I'd love to hear from staff. So if I refer to the property just south of Fox Hill as property 2, right? So the owner of property 2 today, these dotted lines are what these guys are referring to as a ghost plat.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that right-of-way never exists if the owner of property 2 never decides to subdivide their property. If and when the owner of property 2 decides to subdivide, they come before this commission in the exact same way that Fox Hill Drive is coming before us tonight, and we have a very similar discussion about where and how this right-of-way should go, planning for this future through. But if the owner of property 2, whether it's because I have I think you're talking about either the Lang or Servillas. Should they never decide to subdivide, this road never actually exists. So the effect on their property from a value standpoint, I think the only thing that is possible there is if and when they decide to sell it, they're probably required to disclose these ghost plats. Is that a thing?
And typically, if you can demonstrate that these parcels have the potential for further subdivision, for further development, that could be an added value.
Correct, right? So if I'm just selling a big, long piece of property and there's no possibility of subdivision, the value is X. But with the possibility of subdivision, whether the line is red or whether the line is yellow, the price of that, the value of that property conceivably goes up. I think what you're getting at is, does the value go up more if the line is red versus the line being yellow? And that's actually just something we don't know because nobody has proposed developing that property and tried to put homes in there.
And I think what I'm trying to raise is that it seems like this person wasn't here. Gosh, and if you're listening to this recording before the city council meeting, please go to the city council meeting and voice so that you're here and we can ask you questions and learn more about what you think the impact to the future value would be. But that being said, I just wanted to make sure this letter was represented because the thing that stuck out to me the most is when they're talking about they say it's not, reasonable to predetermine what happens to our properties in the future to suit one developer's plans for one property today when there was a previous agreement in place for 16 years or where a possible future road would go. So I guess they don't even necessarily have to sell it and move, right? They could stay living there and choose to subdivide the rest of the plot and sell that off. And then suddenly, because of the kind of path dependency created by the yellow right-of-way, if it's that far to the east, you know what I mean? It's going to encroach on more of that lakeshore property than the red line. So I guess I'm not necessarily saying this is like a deal breaker or something, or we should necessarily be concerned. I just wanted to raise the point and say, gosh, if I was living in that house, I might be concerned. And just want to give that thought to everybody, every citizen who might be impacted.
Can I give another counter to or just a thought? So the top one, the Fox Hill subdivision, where the yellow is, they're building, and I'll quote you, your dream house. So there's plenty of room to the east of that yellow to build a nice house. And so it's even bigger in plot 2 below. And I look at it the other way. If it was red, you're getting into that wetlands. And by moving it to the east, it's giving it a little bit more room so they're not encroaching on the wetlands if they did want to subdivide. So I would say, I think it's okay. It's just one opinion.
Chairman?
Please.
I've got a lot of thoughts, and I think I'm reiterating some ones that have already been made. But, I don't want to see big trees cut down. I mean, I don't. But to be honest with you, my role as a planning commissioner, I don't get to make the judgment as to what's desirable and undesirable. I think big trees are very desirable. I think little ones are less desirable. But this plan is within what is allowed by city ordinance. I appreciate what the neighbors want. I totally have empathy for them. I get that. But when you buy a property like this, you also get the right to develop it. I mean, that's one of the things that's great about the city of Chanhassen. We allow people to develop their properties. It could be different, but from what I've heard tonight, I think they've got a thoughtful plan. And I think they're, trying to be good neighbors and trying to really take into account, the input of everybody. The fact that there is a conservation easement, whether they suggest it, whether the city does, I don't think it matters. But I think it just shows that these trees are front of mind for them. So I think that's a good thing. Am I impressed with 38%? No, but I've seen the property. I understand the limitations of what's being done here. So I appreciate that. on the road, to be honest with you, I think the whole road thing's ugly. But it is. It's just a beautiful property having the road go through. I think it's ugly. But frankly, my opinion is it's never going to go through. And the nice thing is, and you call them lots 2 and 3, owners of lots 2 and 3 get to determine if this thing ever goes through. If they don't like it, they just say no. Just say, hey, we're not subdividing this. And guess what? If they decide that they want to subdivide it, then they're probably going to be pretty darn happy that they have the ability to at least push towards having a road go through. So, chances are we'll never see a road go through that property in our lifetime. That's just my uneducated guess on this. The one comment too that from one of the owners about one developer's plan on the effect on their property and the value. I get all of that, but to be honest with you, the reverse is true too. I mean, you can't sit here and say your decisions are affecting me. Well, your opinions are affecting the owners of another property here because you don't want the development. So it's a two-way street on that. I think I'm done. So.
Sure. Eric, can I ask you a question about the road and what happened in the Lotus Woods subdivision? Because it looks like using Google Maps, as well as looking at the picture we see there, it looks like they have they have the skirt, if I'm using the right term, and then just a stub. Is the water underneath or not?
The water main?
Yes.
Yes, the water main was extended to the property line. There's a temporary hydrant there for...
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, blow off and all that kind of stuff. It was recently installed. I don't know if Google Drive, I think, just recently went through Chanhassen, so we might have some updated imagery, but that was completed last year. So that there is both sanitary, actually, and water.
Because it looks, according to Google Maps, the homeowner used that stub as their driveway.
Correct. Their driveway is accessed through there. So with the Lotus Woods subdivision, they did show, I call it ghost grading, or a grading concept that ensured that when the road went through, they would have an adequate connection with their driveway.
Yeah. My point is that instead of putting this road in, can we just put a skirt and a stub instead of putting the full road in for the right
on the Fox Hill Drive subdivision?
Correct.
Similar to what Lotus
Exactly.
Woods.
Can we save some of the trees?
You could construct a temporary intersection to indicate that there's a future road connection. You could have that construction, or you could have that build scenario. But again, it goes to the point that it's possible or feasible to extend the street. The reason why Lotus Woods did not extend the street was due to grades and the ability to extend the street and not encroach onto surrounding properties. So the engineer of record for that plan set showed plans where it would be an additional 20 feet or 30 feet, which wasn't what the city considered feasible at that time, to have essentially a half constructed street. So it was recommended that it just get stubbed.
So I'm thinking, Commissioner Noyes said, and I agree that if those two homeowners never decide to subdivide, and that's a very real possibility, this may never happen. So why do we want a road to nowhere? So it would be a suggestion just I'm asking if it's possible, to just put a stub in, and then as far as the water, the plan had water, I would leave that up to the city, and as far as the road, if you want to escrow, I'm just trying to see, can we minimize? Would the city then escrow the street part? And then would they require the water, or could you escrow the water too?
Typically with municipal services, that usually gets extended. With the streets, again, there's a practice where if it's not feasible to have the street stub extended to the property line, it's escrowed, similar to Lotus Woods. I guess I wouldn't have any additional information from what I previously said and what's in the staff report about the complications with that, and it's not extraordinary or unheard of to have stub streets extended for that exact reason of kind of impacts to the surrounding neighbors. You're going to have two homes adjacent to that street that would need to get constructed that obviously might have concerns, or they would have to go through the headache of building the road. But again, it's kind of, I defer to those past comments.
Thank you.
Eric, hypothetical question for you. The property that I referred to as property 2, the one that is directly south of Fox Hill Drive, if that were the property before us tonight, would we be asking the property owner to build a small little street that ends on both sides of the property?
You know, I would defer to my fellow staff members, but that could be deemed a preliminary or premature subdivision in that case, because they wouldn't have adequate access to the extension of the public street.
So these two properties might run into barriers to subdivide because the outside properties hadn't subdivided yet and done this work that we're trying to do tonight.
That's correct.
Correct, and I think precedent probably was set with the Eisnes Meets and Bounds subdivision that then granted the easement and set in motion the idea of the planned development.
Yep. Thank you.
They extended utilities to.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. I would be curious to know what the fire chief and what the sheriff and what the EMTs would weigh in on the value of this road from a health and safety perspective. I get the fact that the road is ugly, that it's a road to nowhere right now, but my understanding of what Eric has been saying all night is that neighborhoods need redundancy, redundant access. If you limit access to just one way in and one way out, in the event of some kind of a catastrophe that nobody could predict, for the same reason that I'm sure Joe deals with the 100-year flood when it comes to dealing with stormwater runoff and all that sort of thing, seems to me that the city is being thoughtful and reasonable in wanting to ensure the health and safety of the residents of this neighborhood by requiring redundant access to the neighborhood. And I'm struggling to understand why there's objection to that.
Yeah, no, maybe I can help clear it up. So I don't think anyone here is objecting to if all 4 of these properties were to subdivide, that we need a road that cuts through them for the health and safety of everyone in that area. I think what we're discussing is, while we may require the right-of-way in this property tonight, do we actually have to build the road? Because that road, 1/4 of it, and doing this part, 1/2 of it, but unconnected, serves no purpose until it's connected. So ask the fire chief, ask the EMTs. The road is valuable if and when it exists, but it can only exist if all 4 properties subdivide, come before this committee, and go through this wonderful process.
So, Eric, am I understanding correctly from what Mark just said, that the only way that this road is going to be built is if the other 2 properties south of Fox Hill Drive decide to subdivide?
99.9% yes. I mean, there's always the ability for the city, if there arose a need, which the city does not practice this, I just want to say, that cities have the capability to have right-of-way grabs. They can take the right-of-way and try to construct the street if they find there's a need. However, that is not in the practice in the city. I can't recall in a local street scenario where that has happened, to my recollection. But I would say, to answer your question as straightforward as possible, is yes. I mean, it would require the subdivision of those lots to the south.
Okay, so assuming that the road was just built through the Fox Hill Drive subdevelopment and stopped for the moment, then that short road would still allow, or would it not allow, redundant access? It would not, would it? Because it would not connect with Big Woods Boulevard.
Correct. The intent is to connect Fox Hill Drive to Big Woods. to supply, I use the water main term, but to loop it.
So one final question for me, just getting down to breaking down the recommendation practically then around this road topic. And I do want to say one more. I want to acknowledge that this is not extraordinary, and I agree. I've seen a ton of developments, but a lot of times these things happen in cornfields and other places. I do want to just continue to acknowledge the very unique and special characteristics of the neighborhood, and that's why I think we belabored this point so much. So that being said, breaking this down, the recommendation on the screen kind of does the approval of the plat to subdivide into 4 lots and 1 outlot, and then number 2, it does the variance of the 50-foot public right-of-way, and then that's all subject to conditions of approval. There's nothing in the recommendation kind of referring to the actual construction of the road, which is like the point that we've all been talking about, which nobody seems to want, potentially, at least from the public. Is it within the purview of Planning Commission to add such language to the recommendation regarding recommending against the construction of a road until it can go all the way?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think that's my problem with the road itself, is that it's a waste of time and money and resources for something that could not happen. So why would we build and let something decay that may never connect, and then the city then would have to pay to fix it, to then connect it. And I also have an issue with collecting $45,000 from somebody and letting it sit in a city account for potentially forever. Like, what happens to that money if they never decide to subdivide? Does it sit there? Why are we collecting that money from them when it doesn't impact those houses at all, and it doesn't impact their safety? So I think, yes, getting the easement from the property owners is a recommendation, and I think we should get it and leave the trees there. But I don't necessarily agree with the collection of the money, which, if that's just the way that the city does it, if that's in the city code or whatever that is, that's fine. And if the applicants want to just pay and be done and move on, just move on with this, it's okay too. But that is my 2 cents on that, is I don't agree with either of those practices.
To answer your question, we can absolutely put language in there to get that in front of city council, who makes the final decision on our recommendation. So if you wanted to do so, you would just add that language to whatever you believe the right motion would be.
Thank you.
Sure. Other comments? I would say for me personally, we're all sort of coming to a similar place here, I think. Full disclosure, when I read the packet that I got last week and I saw the number went from 35 to 38, I was like, well, we got 3%. However, I did sit and reflect on that for a while. I went through all the notes of all the people that are here tonight and some that aren't, and came back to the realization that this committee, whether you were here or not, and the last time we adopted the city plan, I think you and I were the only ones that were here, this committee is responsible for the city plan. We are the ones that adopted it. We are the ones that said it's okay to go from whatever tree cover you're at down to the complete nothing, as long as you plant some. Now, the next time I approve that city plan, I'll be looking for things like that, because I just maybe didn't realize that at that point. But that said, I don't know that we as a committee have the right to tell a property owner that, well, we don't like that number, because we actually built into the plan a recourse for when we don't like that number. So that I am overly appreciative that we actually got to 38%, and I'm sure it was no small feat. I like 46% better. And there's no route that I would go where I would say, forget about this right away. We don't need it. To hell with safety. We absolutely need the right of way. Do we have to build it right now? I think is the big question we have. And I personally, I don't know what's going to happen at City Council. I think that we as a committee could come to an agreement like, we secure the right of way, but it doesn't need to be built, and we can escrow the money, or there can be a special assessment in the future to pay for it, one way or the other, but I'm very curious to see what city council will do with it, to be honest with you. Because we are the planning commission, and our job is to plan for the future. And securing the right of way, I believe, is the right plan. I don't think we have to take that extra step now, and I think it's a nice way to exhibit the fact that we do believe this is an exceptional place. This is a different place. Doesn't give us the right to take away rights from developers, but it does give us the right to add language to say, can we treat this one just a little bit differently? So I'm looking at you because you asked whether we could add language to the motion. The hardest part for me in all of these things is adding the right language to the motion, so I'm just kind of waiting for you to do it.
I mean, I can take a stab at it. I mean, I certainly would not feel great voting for a recommendation as worded without that. So I'm writing something along the lines of following, let's see, it would follow the language to allow a 50-foot public right-of-way as shown in the plans, comma, received September 1st, 2022, comma, and then saying, while advising against the construction of any road until such time, I don't know how detailed we need to be, until such time the road can go all the way through.
Let me ask the expert here, so Kate. Is this an additional condition of approval? Okay, so we can literally add language to the conditions of approval that get at the spirit of securing the right of way, but not forcing the building of it at this time. The construction of it at this time.
So you're adding condition number 5 to the engineering?
What I would say is we're talking about adding condition number 5, because I've got some feedback.
Yeah, by all means, sure. But if he were to add it and make a motion, what would that look like?
I think what he said is fine.
What he said is fine. Great. Okay. Please.
What I was going to say is, I mean, I don't feel like I'm in the position to write another condition here. I don't think we know enough about the process that, Kelsey brought up about, escrowing and the right amount or whatever and all that kind of stuff and how that all plays into this. I would, when we've used this before, I would feel much more comfortable with us just making sure that we have heavily noted our concern about building this road at this point in the process and making sure that the city council is aware of that to say, please take this under advisement. We think this is a bad practice. We would like to see, and there may be, and the reason I say that is there may be some other reasons why this should be considered. And I don't think we should stop this project because of that road. I want to save the trees. I like 46% too, but I just don't feel like I'm in the position to write something that's technically accurate. I'd rather go down the road of just making the city council strongly aware of our position.
I agree, because I don't want it to go with a condition, and then if that condition isn't agreeable to city council, then this come to a stop. I'm just saying, if there is a way to not build right now, or to evaluate even the escrow portion of it as well while we're looking at it, I would strongly advise city council to reconsider the city building at this time.
Chairman, I don't know if you can hear me, but
I can hear
asked the planning commission has made a motion, and then add to that motion to say we would like the council to consider. I think what Commissioner Roy said is pretty articulate. If you wanted to repeat that as part of to consider how you want to handle the right of way, that'd be fine.
As part of a separate motion or as part of the main
After you
motion?
make the motion, and you say, but we'd also like the council to consider the following, as Commissioner Roy stated, if you want to further add to that. Either one.
Great. There are two people who agree with that method. Any opposing opinions to that method before we go through the trouble of making a motion that could fail?
I just have one concern.
Yes.
And that is the language, to make sure that the language is accurate and appropriate, and I don't know, I certainly don't want to delay this project any more than anybody else does, but is it important for the city attorney to look at this, or for staff to look at this further in terms of getting the exact language down so that everybody's happy? It doesn't come back to bite anybody?
Well, I think that's the point of, this is a recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
Ratification of whatever language happens at the city council level. So
Then I'm fine with
we
it.
can
Mr. Chair, you're correct.
offer.
You're making a recommendation. What you're trying to do is articulate what concerns you have to
Right.
the city councils.
Right.
As they ruminate on it, they can finalize that. So you're just giving a recommendation.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You got it.
And so our concern is how it's going to be funded, or if the water line's going to go in. We're just concerned we don't want the road to be built, and then the rest of the details will kick it up to the city council?
Yes, and just to be clear, your verbatim minutes are going to the city council too. So they're going to read everything that you've talked about. So, and we'll make sure that we summarize that too. But I would definitely add that you want them to consider the right way.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Anything
I-
else?
I think we should make an amended motion.
Please.
So I'm going to read this, but I'm going to get to a part and say, as included with the fifth.
No, it's a recommend, we're not adding a fifth condition, we're just adding a recommendation to implore city council to explore the option to not build the road at this time. And do you want, okay, I would like to propose a motion. The Chanhassen Planning Commission recommends approval of the preliminary plat to subdivide 2.47 acres into 4 lots and 1 outlot, and a variance to allow a 50-foot public right-of-way, as shown in plans, received September 1st, 2022, subject to the conditions of approval, and adopts the findings of fact and recommendation. The Planning Commission would also like to note that we would like to recommend to City Council that they evaluate the requirement to build the stub/right-of-way at this time versus waiting until there is an actual need.
We have a valid motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes 6-0 and will appear before City Council
October 10th.
October 10th. Thank you, and thank you to all of you for coming in. Moving on to our next item in the agenda. (3609) Red Cedar Point, and I will turn it over to Mackenzie.
Thank you. I think I'm situated. So this is planning case 2213, variance for 3609 Red Cedar Point. The applicant is requesting a variance from the shoreland setback to facilitate the construction of a single-family home. This item, if decided by less than a 3/4 majority of the Planning Commission, will go before the City Council on October 10th. If decided by a 3/4 or higher majority and not appealed, it will be decided in 4 days at the close of the appeal window. So the property is, as I mentioned, located at 3609 Red Cedar Point. This property is zoned RSF. It's a riparian property. It is unique in that it is located on a peninsula, so it has lakeshore on 2 sides. These properties have a 20,000 square foot minimum lot area, 10-foot side yard setbacks, 75-foot shoreland setback, 25% maximum lot cover. Structures are limited to a 35-foot maximum height and are permitted 1 water-oriented accessory structure, which can be set as close as 10 feet from the ordinary high water level with a 10-foot maximum height and 250 square foot maximum. The floodplain in this area is 945.9. So this parcel is 16,501 square feet. It currently has about 13.4% lot cover. It has a non-conforming 4.5-foot west side yard setback, a non-conforming 65-foot south shoreland setback, a non-conforming 79-foot lot width. There is a private street that bisects the property, which creates a unique aspect, and a portion of the northern element of the lot is located within the floodplain. but that's not where they're planning on building, but I just bring that up for completeness sake. So the applicant is proposing to demolish the existing home. Rough outline of the existing home and driveway are in red and purple respectively, and to build a new single-family house on the parcel. Rough outline here. The justification they have provided is that they are going to bring the non-conforming 4-foot side yard setback into compliance. The resulting proposal will be under 25% lot cover. They believe that the proposed location of the home is consistent with the 2 neighboring properties and their shoreline setbacks. They've noted that the reduced side yard setbacks of the neighboring properties constrain their parcel's lake view, and they feel the requested variance is similar to what's been previously granted in the area. And they've noted that the building area is constrained by the presence of the 2 shoreline setbacks, and that they need to maintain separation from the private drive, and that has required the house to be shifted south on the available building pad. I believe Water Resources will take the next slide.
Engineering and Water Resources reviewed the variance application. Our findings is that there is adequate room on the property to build a home that would meet all setback requirements. And as such, Water Resources and Engineering cannot support the requested variance. I would note that it would reduce the size of the home being proposed. The stormwater treatment in this area of Chanhassen is deficient. In reviewing the applicant's submittal to our variance report, there is a proposed project in the capital improvement program that is going to invest stormwater or public dollars into constructing public stormwater infrastructure in this area in the effort to provide more stormwater treatment. If the variance would be approved by the Planning Commission, I would ask that you look into mandating that these buffer areas are created. Natural shoreline buffers have many benefits, including filtering pollutants from stormwater, creating wildlife habitat, and just improving the aesthetics and the value of the land and the adjoining properties. It seems that the applicant is willing to comply with the buffer requirement on the southern part of the property. I do understand that there's some drainage issues on the northern portion of the property. So in lieu of a shoreline buffer area, I propose that the applicant, as an alternate solution, could dedicate, a small portion of their property as drainage and utility easement, where funding from the capital improvement project for this area could construct a proposed rain garden kind of in this area here, which would solve some of those issues that were brought up from the applicant. And I would note that that would be a benefit to the applicant in a couple of different ways, namely that it would be on the onus of the city of Chanhassen to not only construct that rain garden or BMP, but also own and operate it. And basically we'd need probably about 25 feet of drainage and utility easement to construct that BMP. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mackenzie.
Thank you. So when staff went over the proposal, we agree and appreciate that the applicant is removing the non-conforming side yard setback. However, if you look at this graphic here, we've indicated the area of the shoreline setbacks in red. There is a reasonable building pad clear of the shoreline setback. In the staff report I mentioned, it measures about 69 feet wide, I believe. 67, my apologies, at its shortest point, and 59 feet wide at its shortest point in terms of width. By context, I provided, the assumed footprint of a house for a subdivision is 60 by 60 with the assumption that that's enough to provide reasonable use of property. What the applicant's requesting accommodates a house that's about 80 feet from the furthest point of the screen porch to the furthest point of the deck. The city's does feel that the private drive bisecting the property does force a little bit of a southern shift, and that is a unique circumstance that we feel grants some variance from the shoreline setback, though not to the 22.3 foot requested by the applicant. Past practice has been to limit shoreline setbacks to the extent of existing nonconformity. In this case, it'd be a 10-foot setback variance would be the nonconformity. We can't really find any precedent in the variances given in the area for a 12.3 foot expansion of it. The largest was a 3-foot expansion of a nonconformity granted due to inadequate driveway length. We did draw a line connecting the corners of the principal structures, and the principal structure here does squeeze just a little past that at its furthest point. So we do feel like the house creeps a little towards the lake shore in terms of the relative place of the neighboring homes. Ultimately, staff concluded that the extent of the variance request is primarily the result of the applicant's design choice, and that there are alternative siting on the parcel and alternative designs that would not require that extensive of an encroachment into the shoreland. We mentioned the importance of the conditions requiring the 20-foot buffer, or engineering would also be willing to accept a rain garden, which would provide a similar environmental benefit. For that reason, staff's recommendation would be to deny the requested 22.3 foot variance and approve a 10-foot variance, which would be in keeping with the existing nonconformity. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Questions for staff?
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
Mackenzie, assuming that we approve the variance that the applicant wants, in the staff report you indicate that this would set a precedent, and so subsequent developers or subsequent applicants would also want the same amount, and pretty soon we've got a problem of major proportions. Is that accurate?
That's definitely one of staff's concerns. You'll notice one of the things the applicant mentioned in their letter is that they feel like what they're asking is consistent with what's been previously granted in the area. A lot of times what people propose is, what they believe the Planning Commission will support. And when they go through a list of variances and say, oh, this person got a variance that allowed them to move closer to the lake, then they think that's something they can request because there's the precedent that that's happened. That's one of the reasons why staff has always really stressed the importance of maintaining that non-conforming setback so that we don't continue kind of moving forward and forward.
But how do we achieve the objective you just mentioned and still have give some understanding to the applicant's request that it's been done in the past? Why are you excluding me from the variance?
I would say the city has, I went through in the report all 21 variances that have been granted in this area. There are 2 where we've allowed someone to go closer than the non-conforming setback. One was in the mid-'80s, and the house was never actually built that close to the lake. And the second was, again, that 3-foot, where due to the very unique circumstances of that lot, the city council decided an exemption from that policy to give them an additional 3 feet to have adequate off-street parking in their driveway was justified. So what every variance should come down to is what unique characteristic about the property necessitates the variance. We use past practice as guidance, but ultimately what staff does is we look at the property in front of us and we say, what is unique about this parcel that requires what they're requesting? And in this case, staff felt that while the private drive justified some variance, it did not justify the extent of the variance being requested.
Thank you.
Just want to understand real. So 10 is currently sort of our precedent, if you will. First part of my question is, am I understanding that right?
To some extent. So if we look at this drawing here, this red thing is, to the best of my ability, using Microsoft Word and my artistic skills, the footprint of the existing home. Mm-hmm. So what staff has always done is we tell people, we understand that these parcels are difficult and challenging to work with. And we look at where it's currently built up to in relation to the shoreland, and we basically draw a line there and say, we acknowledge that houses need to get bigger to meet modern standards. You can expand it, but don't go closer to the lake than it already is. In this case, it goes 65 feet from the lake with a 75-foot setback, so we say it has a 10-foot encroachment. And staff's recommendation is that if a variance is granted, that be the extent of the variance.
I understand. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Just a quick question on numbers. So the setback from the lake to the edge of the porch is 65?
For the existing home, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. I would invite the developer or the owner to present or speak to the application. Totally up to you.
Kerber Family Homes. My customers, the Sanders, we've been working with them a while on this plan. We've kind of redesigned multiple times with respect to having courtesy to the neighbors. That was one of the reasons why we wanted to clear up the side lot lines. The way we positioned the house as well had taken them into account. I also wanted to point out that the main structure of the home, we're really close to that 65-foot sideline or setback. The portions that you're seeing protruding past would be like the deck area or patio area, and I just want to make sure you guys understand that. And with the letter that went out from the Sanders, they kind of, I'm hoping you guys had a chance to review that. It came out late in the day, but it kind of paints the picture of what is already there, we were hoping to fit in and conform in that neighborhood, just slide it in. So, any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Gerber? Was this a surprise to you as a developer?
A little bit. We've done multiple projects in the city of Chan. It has been about 8 years since I've been here at council, but I was a little bit shocked. I definitely knew we had an uphill battle just because of the uniqueness of the property, and at the end of the day, it's going to be a challenge regardless, even if when everything gets approved, it's a sensitive piece of property. So,
Have you all discussed plans for a 10-foot setback? I'm sorry, 10-foot setback would be very bad. A 10-foot variance from the lake shore setback.
We talked about changing some design points of it, kind of going to what staff was recommending, but the Sanders, after being on the property for almost 4 years here and knowing their neighbors, they've kind of said, staff isn't there to observe what we have observed, so we want to be respectful for our neighbors and try to not block their views. So that's what we've decided at this point.
Thank you.
What's the square footage of the proposed home?
The square footage of the proposed home is actually, the main floor is 2,270 square feet.
And that's just the main floor?
That's the main floor, and there's an upper level that would be, I think, 24.
I got just under 5,000 of living area.
That would be correct, yeah. So we'd be under 5,000 for sure.
Yep, it's a little under.
Yep. It is a slab-on-grade home, so one level with a story above.
Other questions for the developer? Thank you, Mr. Gerber. At this point, I'll open the public hearing for this item and invite anyone in the room who wants to speak on this issue to approach the podium. Please state your name and address and share your comments with us.
My name's Gary Renicky. We live next door at 3607. So I think it's the other property that you're seeing up there. First, we've lived there for about 3.5 years in our, I think, 102-year-old, very quirky house. So, we've appreciated getting to know Pete and Jade, and frankly, we hope they're able to build their dream home and can do whatever they want, but of course, not at the expense of our property or our views either. So I honestly just want to kind of understand where things stand now, because I kind of want to understand, well, where's the line then? I don't think I have any objection to what sounds like the current staff recommendation, but I wish I could visualize it. Is there something
I can maybe help you.
Where you can show, our line, the proposed line, Anderson's line next door on the other side, and just kind of see, would that kind of make everything line up, or is somebody going to be sticking in front of somebody else?
It's maybe it makes it easier. Just the recommendation from staff is that wherever the end of their house ends, the end of their deck ends right now is where the end of anything would end for a future development. 10 feet.
That's for the house itself, or then we have the deck beyond that?
Anything that's been developed. So the setback is the setback, whether it's a deck, the side of a house, the front door. Whatever the furthest, I guess in this case, south, would need to be, correct me if I'm wrong, 65 feet from the shoreline, which is exactly what it is today.
I just want to let you know, I think that's a little more relief than we need. I understand the city's constraints on that, but, if it went farther out than that, we're not going to scream bloody murder about it.
So this is just a overhead view of your house, their house, the existing house right now.
Yeah.
So right now, lining up, that's building portions of it here. This line across here is where your deck is and kind of the neighbors.
Yeah. Where
Pete and Jada are proposing, the house would be back in this area, but the deck would be in this area.
And when you talk about deck, we're looking at this elevation.
Not even back here, at the green.
Does deck have a roof on it?
That was in the design, it is a covered porch or a covered deck.
But what's proposed is not a covered deck, right? Because your lot cover didn't include the deck. We can sort that out later. Yeah.
I'm sorry,
to
clarify.
Well, it makes a difference to me. I mean,
course.
if we're talking a flat ground level roughly deck, I couldn't care less. If it's if it has a roof and walls, then it does impede with sight lines, and then I want to have a better understanding of where it is.
And I'm sorry, just to clarify, that was back in this area.
Okay, but so this is still part of the plan, though?
That is still part of the proposed plan.
And, okay. So, I know this is hard when we're talking up here, but it's helpful, because to me, this looks like the end of my house, and then that sticks out farther south than the end of my house.
That is correct. Here's the actual livable structure.
Yeah.
And then this would be the covered deck if we proceed with that.
Again, if the deck wants to be covered, I think you're going to need a lot cover variance. And then we're talking about something quite a bit different than what staff's understanding is. Because your survey does not include that deck area in your lot cover. In which case, I would have to recommend that we table it, because going to really change how we look at it, I think.
Well, he's got.
So, sir, maybe I can help you out and help us all out here. So,
Sure, yeah, sure.
Given what you know today, what would be your comment or opinion if there was not a covered deck at this variance, and if there was a covered deck at this variance?
If the deck is not covered, then I have no objection to it at all. If it is covered, then I want to make sure I understand, and it's sometimes hard to do on paper and on pictures, but, you know, on site, if I'm looking to the southwest, now is it interfering with the view I have? And, you know, now do I get a variance to build mine farther? I mean, you understand the effect here.
100%,
Where
yes.
we just kind of like, I mean, I understood that we were looking for, you know, uniformity here without
So one
something
thing that I would
protruding.
just add when
Yeah.
you're thinking about that is,
Yeah.
okay, we're talking about a couple different numbers here, right?
Yeah.
They're requesting a variance that would put the structure, including the deck, closer to the lake than they are right now.
Yes.
Okay,
I
so you gotta
understand.
think about it from that perspective, or whatever they're proposing from a structure, you know, it also could end up being where the building ends right now, right? It would just be a new structure, right, type of thing. So I mean, you know, and there's a fairly large difference there, right? So
Yeah.
I think when you're thinking about it from what does it do for the aesthetics of your view, you got to think about it where it is now, or if we should approve the variance, what that does.
Well, there certainly are no issues with where the current structure is. And there would be no issues if it extended somewhat farther out than that. But that's the whole question, is, you know, if something more is going to be allowed. If you want an answer from me, whether I would object to it or approve it, I don't know until I know what it actually is and where it would actually be.
Their original application was 12 feet further than it is today. So if you have thoughts on that, we would appreciate those. If not, that's okay too.
Yep.
I should have come
Yeah,
up here.
that's fine,
sorry.
Jada, that's,
I drew this line from the neighbor's deck.
do you know this is Jada
Hi.
Sanders?
Can you put that on to the radio?
Hi, okay.
Yep, perfect.
Thanks.
There you go.
Jada Sanders. Sorry I sent Brad up here with this picture. I just drew a line from the decks, which aren't reflected on the survey, so that you could see what's there. And we're proposing, or we're asking to build our deck to the same distance as the neighbor's decks. So the
As the
green
neighbors
line,
mean-
so we would still not come in front of the green line. Does that make sense? The red line is actually where the neighbor's decks and Gary's patio, which he inherited, he did not build, are actually non-conforming setbacks.
Is your intention to enclose it into a porch or a deck?
Our intention is to have it open, to have a pergola over a dining table in the middle, potentially cover, can you see this? Nope, not helpful. Open, pergola, possibly have a roof over a future hot tub.
So if they're gonna have a roof, Mackenzie, does this need to be tabled?
They have 250 square feet roughly to work with in lot cover. In theory, you know, loving doing quick math as I talk, could a roof go over the hot tub? Yes, that would then cut off any future shed or anything else on the property, barring another plan altering the lot cover. But ultimately, the applicant can choose how to reappropriate lot cover as they will within the parcel as well, either, you know, altering driveway configuration or removing a roof from the front to get it in the back. That's their decision. But I've double checked the math in the survey, and I'm fairly confident roofs are not included in the deck portion.
So does that mean that we should table this until staff has an opportunity to review revised and updated plans?
Here's what I would recommend. I think we should have a commission discussion about the variance, because what I'd hate to do is send them off and they go and reconfigure, and then they come back and we go, we're not going to grant you the variance, right? That's a waste of their time. And I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think we should get everything out on the table, talk about it, so that if you have to alter your plans, you understand where we sit, right?
The last point I would make too is if they are granted a reduced setback variance than they're requesting, the necessary reductions, moving the property forward, et cetera, is going to reduce lot cover and might make the deck question moot.
Correct.
So we should follow process and finish with the public hearing. So, sir, I would invite you to make any additional comments if you have them.
I guess I'm still kind of synthesizing it, but because I'm not sure drawing the line from my deck is the right spot, because, you know, we have corner windows on the house right here too, so it's sight lines that could be affected there. Again, basic deck on Sanders' property that comes out, into a non-conforming area. I don't care, but if it has roof, walls, screens, whatever, it's all pretty cliche, I think, site view type stuff that I'm concerned about. So that's really it on that. And then my only other comment is, and it sounds like it's potentially being addressed, is just, and this isn't really the issue that's before the Planning Commission directly anyway, but there are drainage issues in the area, and our property is fine. And just to kind of go on record anyway, we'd just like to make sure that whatever construction, potentially regrading, whatever is going on here, doesn't adversely affect the current stormwater runoff for us, which right now is not problematic.
Great. Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing portion and open it up to exactly what you asked for, which is comments.
Cool. Can I start?
Yes, please.
First, Mackenzie, I have a follow-up question. That great photo that they just had up with the two lines drawn that kind of connect the front of those properties. I take it the two neighbor properties, if we were to dig into them, those are both non-conforming as it relates to lakeside setbacks today, correct?
The one to the east definitely is. The primary structure to the west, I think, actually does meet the lakeshore setback, but the deck and patio encroach into it. So the short answer is yes. Both of those properties have non-conforming lakeshore setbacks, one just for the accessory structure and one for primary structure and accessory.
So then my question is drawing those lines even a valid part of the discussion from a comparison perspective? Or is it, I mean, we can certainly use that as input to say, hey, part of our considerations is how does this new structure affect the neighbors? I totally get that. But as it relates to the setbacks themselves, we got to we're measuring it on the merits of that project, not where non-conforming structures sit next to it, correct?
Yes. From the staff perspective, which is always the kind of strictest interpretation of the ordinance, the finding of fact we need to find to grant a variance is a unique circumstance of the property in question justifies the requested variance. And that's where ultimately staff's conclusion was that, yes, the neighbors, due to the fact that they built before current rules were in place, got to go closer, but when I look at this parcel, take into account the lot depth, take into account the configurations, I believe reasonable use can be achieved with a smaller variance. And that's the standard that staff assessed it from.
Okay. I guess my other comments, Mark, you probably know this better than anybody, but I kind of got really two tenets that I follow as a commissioner, and that's people have a right to develop their land in Chanhassen. I think we do a really good job of that. but there's some rules around it. The other tenet is I'm not a big fan of creating precedents, especially on Lakeshore. I'm very concerned about, we just already referred to the 21 variances that have been granted in the area, and the most egregious one is 3 feet, right? So I'm very concerned about that, because this changes basically the ordinance going forward in this area, because people are going to go, if we grant 22 feet, people are going to go, that's the standard. And I realize this is a unique property. It's on a peninsula. I get all of that. And unique properties require unique solutions. But that unique solution may be a design change, really, to try to make this better fit into the space that we have. So, kind of my thoughts.
Can I clarify something you said there? You said 3 feet. Is it really 3 feet or 13 feet?
So there's 2 things at play. Historically, we have given some large shoreline setback variances in this area. There are 3 times when the city's granted a shoreline setback variance in excess of 20 feet. I'm going from my memory, so if somebody looks at my staff report and finds a 4th one, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure it's 3 times we granted them for over 20 feet. However, the staff's policy has always been, we will never recommend going closer to the lake than your existing nonconformity. What Commissioner Noyes was referencing was, with the exception of a weird variance in 85 where I can't figure out what happened, we have one where the city council on an appeal allowed the property to go 3 feet closer than its existing nonconformity. I believe that property ended up with a 49-foot setback, so they got probably the largest historically granted, and it worked out to like a 25-point-something foot shoreline setback all told, but they started, 23 feet or 22 feet from the lake, and then were granted 3 more because the road was built partially on their property. So that was the unique circumstance there where it was, this is why we're willing to bend that policy. Did that make sense? Or should I break down the numbers?
So just one step further. So if we grant a 10-foot variance, the setback will be 65 feet.
Correct.
If we grant a 10-foot, what variance if you were to build the existing structure today, what variance would that have needed? Where does that go out to?
It would need a 10-foot variance.
So that's 10. It's the same.
Yep.
It's the same.
And that's why staff recommends it, because as a non-conforming use, the applicant has the right to bulldoze that house and build a house in exactly that footprint without any variances and that's kind of the rationale staff has used for the non-conforming use being establishing the line that should be held, if that makes sense.
Okay, and so just to put a stamp on it, the most we have ever done beyond, when you factor in the existing footprint of a house that might be non-conforming, the most we've gone is 3 additional feet beyond that.
With the exception of the weird variance in the mid-'80s, which was not built even though it was granted, going 10 feet further. And I spent a lot of time, I don't know what happened there.
Okay, all right, clear.
It is not, you're welcome to put that photo up there, but the public input is, it is ended.
Can I ask you a question?
Well, you can ask the chair a question.
Can I show it on the photo what the question is?
Please, go
ahead. So clearly these houses come further south to the shoreline, so there's no question that they're in violation. This house was just built in 2019. Is this what you're referring to?
That's the one that was granted the variance to go 3 feet closer than the non-existing setback that was created by the cabin that used to be there. Yep.
Which would be 16 feet closer to the shore than what you're saying we can do.
Yes.
So our proposal is still farther back from the water than they are.
Which is why the city really stresses not using the most extreme variance granted in the region as the rubric, because then everything moves closer, and it has to be the unique factor of the parcel.
And I just want the reminder, we are changing our side. I'm not supposed to talk, am I?
No, we've got the side setback in consideration. Thank you. Other questions or comments or motions?
Quick comment that what Commissioner Noyes said is straight on, and we also grandfather in, if there's an existing structure, we give I don't want to say precedence, but preference to that line. We'll hold that line as a setback from a water structure. So, I think that's a, not to be punny, but that's a good line to hold.
Yes.
Setbacks and buffers are there for a reason, unless, as staff said, there was a unique circumstance, and there doesn't appear to be one in this case, that can't be solved by a redesign of the home.
I would agree.
Can I get clarification on just the one statement about your grandfather in? I'm just curious, the houses on each side, so if they would at some point go into redevelopment, am I understanding that they would be grandfathered in so they could build back to that patio area?
The city, in recommending the granting of a variance, would regularly recommend holding the line where it exists today. So these houses to the left and right, if they went through a redevelopment, they would still have to come here and request a variance, but the city would the staff would draw the line and say, hey, you go up to this existing nonconformity and we're willing to get behind you. You go past it, that's when we have to set the right precedent for the community so that all of these houses don't inch closer to the lake over time.
Okay. I was just in the understanding when you said grandfather in, they could go to the existing patios that were there, which would then eventually
So to clarify, we would not, the attorney advises me to say I never prejudge an application, but I do not believe it likely that staff would recommend allowing the principal structure to cover the deck and patio. Under the logic that I was going through, what staff would do in that case would be to say the principal structure can go to the edge of the existing principal structure, a new deck could go to the edge of the new deck, a new patio could go to the edge of the new patio because that's what, under nonconforming law, they're allowed to do. We would not allow an intensification of that nonconformity within the shoreland, if that makes sense. So converting the deck to living area, for instance.
Okay, I just wanted more clarification.
Would not recommend approval.
Other comments from commissioners and/or motions?
I'll propose a motion.
Yes, you will.
The Chanhassen Board of Appeals and Adjustments denies the requested 22.3-foot shoreland setback variance and approves a 10-foot shoreland setback for the construction of a home and deck, subject to the conditions of approval, and adopts the attached findings of fact and decision.
We have a valid motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes 6-0, and City Council on October?
If appealed, it would go on October 10th.
If appealed, that's right. Sorry. Thank you. October 10th. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to our third item, general business and revisiting our short-term rental code amendment. Almost. Rehydrate, Mackenzie. You got some explaining to do. No.
Sometimes it terrifies me how much my voice is in the public record for all eternity, but it is what it is. So this is, as I'm sure the Planning Commission remembers, during the public hearing on September 6th, you tabled this and provided staff some instruction asking us to try to tweak it and bring it back for you on September 20th. So without going into too much background detail, because it's fresh in everyone's mind, The main concerns that staff picked up on were that residents were concerned that proposed standards were too rigid, that they didn't adequately take into account unique circumstances, and didn't align with how people actually use these properties during the daytime. Residents also expressed concern that the proposal didn't have provisions addressing dogs, daytime parking, and property upkeep. The commissioners directed staff to amend the ordinance to allow exemptions, remove daytime guest limits, clarify how our children are treated, and clarify the intent of the right to inspect privacy provisions. So based on that, staff made the following changes to the proposed ordinance. It was clarified that children, accompanying children are not counted towards the occupancy limit. We put in language allowing staff to approve higher occupancy and parking limits at the request of somebody applying for a license. We put in a clause saying that fencing should be present for short-term rentals permitting dogs. We clarified the language to state that inspection permission is only for the exterior property areas. It wasn't really our intention to ever go into the property. We removed the daytime visitor limits. We clarified the hours for overnight parking. I realized reading it that it was ambiguous because I didn't spell out when overnight was, so I changed that. A provision requiring pets to be leashed when not in fenced areas, and then to provide an appeal mechanism for staff's determination of occupancy and parking limits. So if, for instance, somebody said, based on my driveway, I think I can accommodate 50 cars, and staff said, we think 12, they could then go to the city council, and the council could say 35 or whatever number, made the most sense. So the way staff understands it, based on some feedback from residents, is there's a few outstanding questions. One is the language staff added involving pets. Is the fence requirement excessive? Would a leash requirement alone be sufficient? Or because the city code has existing language prohibiting dogs running at large and the short-term rental ordinance requires compliance with all city code, are the existing prohibitions sufficient? Daytime visitors, staff has heard a lot of concern over, noisy daytime pool parties, and the question is Planning Commission comfortable that the existing noise and nuisance ordinance is enough to deal with those situations, or does the daytime limit at some level make sense? Staff did do a little looking into the suggestion that was had for exempting properties zoned A2. I went through it and I found 125 A2 properties with houses in the cities. In my opinion, the majority of those kind of fall into what I'd call large lot suburban development patterns. So if you look here, 22 of those properties are on lots of less than 1 acre. 40 are between 1 and 2.5 acres. And then the rest are over 2.5 acres. A lot of those houses, just due to the fact that they're either in 1 acre developments or 1.5 acre developments, the properties do definitely have the ability to impact each other in a way very similar to what we see in the other districts. So we don't believe that the large lot zoning A2 necessarily guarantees lower impact. And staff really feels strongly that the ordinance should be global to all short-term rentals. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for Mackenzie?
I have a question, Mackenzie. You may have already answered it, but I just want to be clear. I thought one of the things that staff was going to address was the request of an exemption based on a property's unique circumstances. So even though you've outlined these 125 houses, who are on large lots, there are certainly some, and I presume Mr. Bloomquist's property would be among them, where there may not be an issue with noise and all of the other concerns that somebody such as the Blisses have with the property adjacent to them. Is there still no reason why there isn't an opportunity to provide an exemption or a request for an exemption on a particular property?
So staff, our understanding was that the concern was that the parking and occupancy limits didn't make sense in the context of those properties. And our way of granting exemption was not to exempt them entirely from the need to be licensed, but to have the ability for them to request an exemption from the standards to guarantee that the license they are issued allows them to conduct their business in the manner they're accustomed. So, in Mr. Bloomquist's case, he's mentioned he has a very long driveway. He would, I would assume, give me rough calculations for the size of his driveway, the number of cars that he feels it could accommodate, and I would likely sign off on it. If I didn't, he certainly would be able to appeal that to the city council. They would look at it and say, well, this individual has X number of 5 stars reviews. You acknowledge you've never had a problem with him. We can always change the limit if we ever receive a complaint. Here's your limit. It's on your license. It goes forward. We felt that was preferable given the other benefits of the ordinance, like staff having the ability to contact. I know he mentioned his neighbors all have his contact information, but I don't. If there were a problem, this allows staff to reach out and work with him directly to address it, things like that. So that's why we're, again, strongly in favor of applying it to all properties and then granting exemptions from the provisions that could restrict the operations.
So just to be clear, there is an opportunity for an exemption.
Not from the license, but from some of the occupancy and parking. You would still need a license to have a short-term
Of course.
rental. Yeah.
Right.
But yes, I put in there that occupancy limits and parking limits can be requested at a higher level.
I think the term exemption is probably wrong. You're granting an exception, correct?
Thank you.
Yes,
You're
it's a
correct.
modification.
An exception.
Yes.
You're right. I apologize.
Yeah.
Just to make sure I'm understanding right, that would happen through a process where the staff would grant exception, and then following that would be the step to appeal to city council if you still disagreed.
Yep, correct. So at the time of doing a license, they would state in writing, why they were requesting the exception, and we would then either grant it, or if we denied it, we would deny it with, here's why we denied it, and they could, of course, appeal it.
Are there does that kind of, though, become subjectively up to who was ever employed by city staff at that time, or do we write into it any written guidelines or objective, measures for how you do or do not grant exceptions? Or does that become purely the down to the opinion of who's ever employed in that role at that time?
So I did put loose guidelines, but I didn't want to create, weird made up mathematical equations that, so I put things like, may approve or deny higher parking after taking considered factors such as presence of off-street parking pads, driveway lengths and width, availability of on-street parking. City may approve higher occupancy limit considering factors such as home size, number of beds, distance from neighboring properties. There is administrative discretion in that. I would say, however, given the way cities tend to work, if somebody asked for a license 1 year and they were granted something and there have been no issues, it would be pretty atypical for staff to reverse course and say, nope, next year you can only have 10 people when you never had problems with 14. I will also say that the council appeal process provides a level of consistency, because if as staff I say no to something and I can't defend it before 5 elected members of the city, it will be overturned. And that would be true regardless of which staff member looked at it. And especially more so if they went to those elected members and said, I have 15 years of permits saying I've always had 16 people here, and now the new guy says I can have 8. It's very hard for me to see council backing staff were that type of rapid, arbitrary switch to happen.
And just to clarify that, so if I apply, get a license and an exception in year 1, when I renew my license in year 2, is the default that those exceptions continue, or am I also reapplying for those exceptions again in year 2?
I would assume it would continue. I would assume you would say I'm renewing my license under the terms last year.
Okay.
I have not yet drafted the forms. I will probably include that in the forms once I create the paperwork. But
Okay.
yeah,
Thank you.
I don't think we'd make them argue the case every year if there were no issues.
Regarding the maximum number of vehicles in the driveway and the garage stalls, does that exclude the parking available on the street in front of the rental property?
Yeah, so when they ask for an overnight parking limit, we're obviously going to be assuming the most restrictive conditions, which in Chanhassen is winter, where you can't park overnight on the streets. So any parking we granted for overnight would have to be entirely accommodated off-street, garage stalls and driveway.
And have you updated the vehicle limit to include cars parked on the street in front of, my reading of the ordinance, and correct me if I'm wrong, does not appear to address a daytime vehicle limit, which Ms. Bliss had requested in her recent email.
It does not. Once we remove the daytime occupancy, I think then it gets really challenging to track down whose vehicle is whose, especially if we're dealing with street parking during the day. I try not to put things in that I don't feel there's a practical way to enforce, and I think a daytime vehicle limit would be very challenging.
Given the photographs that she provided in her email, it's pretty obvious that she's got a huge problem to deal with on a daily basis.
So if she's blocked in and calls the city to report it, what is the violation track, and at what point does the city revoke their permit?
Yeah, so in her case, what we would go under with, that situation there is we have, at no time may vehicles be parked on grass or so as to obstruct access to neighboring residences, and that's where we get them. If they put enough cars there that it obstructs access to her property, she takes a photo like that, we say, well, that's obstructing access. That's a strike. For something severe like that, we could jump to suspension of license, or, depending on how responsive they were, maybe we would just do, we'll figure that out a lot based on how the owners react, to be honest. But that was staff's rationale for that. Certainly, if it's something the Planning Commission feels should be added, we can add a daytime vehicle limit.
Other questions for staff? Great. Then we just move right to comments. We have. Correct.
Add some additional comments.
I will open the public hearing in case there are folks like yourself who would like to speak. Come on up.
So we're at Powers Boulevard. I don't want to go through all the information again, but under the B1, the non-refundable amount, it's not determined. I heard $50 thrown around. It's just all this needs to be clarified. Maximum overnight vehicles, 2 per garage, 2 driveway plus the number of garage stalls. Obviously, city may increase that limit. I think that these rules need to be better explained. It's my experience that city employees have made personal decisions on how the rules are enforced rather than following code. You guys addressed it a little bit there. When I'm sitting before the current city planning commission right now, the members will change in January of 23, as well as the city council members. And I'll have to, again, the rules will be subject to interpretation, so they really need to be tightened up a lot.
The one comment I would make on that, though?
Yes.
The interpretation is happening at the planner and, Mackenzie level, correct? So, while there may be turnover in the planning commission, there may be turnover in the city council, the people that are going to be looking, he's not going anywhere, right? Okay.
Yeah. Mackenzie forever?
Well, to be clear, just to maybe compliment that, every word we're saying into these microphones is recorded for all of perpetuity. So if they ever want to know the intent of what we did here tonight, they'll always be able to watch this video or read the notes.
It's just been my past experience that, and I had that in the letter, that's subject to interpretation. So forgive me for the skepticism about the interpretation of the rules. Short-term rental permit for the dogs must include suitable fencing. How do I explain to this? Yes, this is a great big yard. It's bigger than a baseball field, but your dog can't play in it. I have a couple of pictures of the property if you guys haven't seen it. Oh, you have? Yeah. I didn't know if you all saw it or not. Yep. Okay, perfect. As far as listing the advertising property license, I'll just tell you that there will be people that try and backtrack that. They'll go onto a Verbo, they'll look up the license, they'll figure out who owns it, and try and go around Verbo. and rent it directly from us, because all our contact information will be there. Our contact information isn't on there, and it's not given until those people have paid and they're about a week away from moving in. They don't even know where the house is. So if they know where it is, then they can work around the system and cut Verbo out of the system. And also, if they rent outside of that, then Verbo is obviously not going to cover liability insurance, which is $1 million in the property. So just to let you know that there are people that can cheat the system. When they're talking about
Question, so.
Yeah.
Then what do other cities or other, I mean, if you're licensed.
Yep.
And people could look up the license.
Yep.
And go around Verbo.
Yep.
Can't you deny that and say, no, you have to go through Verbo because then I'm covered?
That's what
take on all that risk.
that's what we do. That's what we do. But you have a problem neighbor, which doesn't want to abide by the rules, and they could easily do that. So it wouldn't be so much for us because we don't let them go outside. But for a problem house that thinks that the rules don't apply to them, then they would do that.
Isn't that an issue between you and Verbal then? Doesn't have anything to do with the city?
It doesn't. Other than the reason the licensing on there, someone could circumvent it. That's all.
Okay.
That's the whole point of it.
Okay.
It's not the licensing issue. It's having it posted on the website that they could then circumvent Verbal.
Going through the service. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I understand.
Okay. Thanks for letting me clarify. Guests not permitted to participate in any party or gathering that gives rise to noise between 10 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the morning in a way that would be plainly audible at the property line. I've already established that it'd be hard for noise to leave the property because of its size, and the ambient noise from Highway 212 and Powers Boulevard is about 65 decibels, which is kind of a rowdy restaurant. So how do they go about measuring that? Someone would have to go out, stand off the property, wait for Powers to die down and say, hey, I can hear something out there. What is your level?
But couldn't you acknowledge that in your request for an exception to the license?
Yeah, I'm still skeptical of
Well, you can be skeptical,
Can
but
I ask a question? Your line of questioning is confusing me just slightly.
Sure.
I mean, I know you've got an impeccable record from your property.
Yep.
And you seem to be kind of, and I'm just going to use this word, nitpicking what we're doing here as it relates to other property owners.
No,
and maybe I'm missing something here, but that's kind of where I'm getting.
Yeah, I'm looking at my property.
Okay.
And the fact is that it's really hard for noise to leave the property.
Okay.
And it's even harder for it to overcome the ambient road noise.
But we understand all that.
Okay.
You are the exception.
Okay.
Right. I'm not worried about you. I'm worried about the other ones.
I know, and
it seems like you are too.
I really feel for them. I really do.
We're trying to get relief for people like Mr. and Mrs. Bliss.
Exactly.
Okay.
So is it true that he is the exception, or could it be possible that Mr. and Mrs. Bliss are the exception? Right? I think that's a question we should all consider. We shouldn't consider that assumption to be fact. That's just worth pointing out.
Agricultural, and that doesn't apply at all.
I'm going to bring us back to the fact that this is the public hearing, so please offer your comments. We're not going to ask any more questions. We're going to let you finish, and then I'm going to do this.
Thank you. As far as the number of vehicles, I mean, I've already established I can park a lot of cars on there. The driveway is 12 feet wide. Even if they put half the car in the driveway, half in the grass, it's a lot of cars. But the point is that with an evening limit at midnight, at 10 o'clock, noise really can't leave there anyways if there's not any amplified sound. And I'm trying to make sure that I'm not encumbering my customers, because they'll say, the last people that we talked about, the ones that were from university, said that, we're only having 14 people, so we should be okay, because we have that limit on the website. As far as guests, I think there's only 5 people that stay there. But So we're just trying to make sure that it isn't killing their enjoyment. As far as the noise, again, someone going off property, trying to hear something, it'd be really hard. And we are hoping that we don't have to have that hanging over our head. The good neighbor policy, I put that in there. According to the ordinance that they're proposing, they want it taped to the back side of the doors. And that,
Can you clarify?
it actually is on there. That's where I came up with it.
Posted or conspicuous location nearby. That would give.
By the primary doors.
By the primary doors.
Yep.
That would give alternatives to taping it.
Right, which would be a sliding glass door in the downstairs, a sliding glass door on the upper deck, or the front door. We can put it in our welcome packet, in our welcome book. It's a 3-ring binder about this thick. We can put it first page so they can see. As far as providing renters information on emergency egress, it's fairly obvious. If the house is on fire, you get out. If you can't get out a door, you get out a window. How do I translate? And there are fire extinguishers on every level, and we tell them that. So what we're hoping for is that you target the bad actors and the properties that they're at, rather than one that is such a large lot, which even by their numbers is a relatively small number of properties in the Chanhassen area. I don't think that the ordinance can be a one-size-fit-all. I'm going to suggest that the rules apply to the properties zoned R for residential. And granting exemptions where it's appropriate. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak during this public forum, please?
I'll be pretty quick.
State your name and address.
I'm Mark
please.
Bliss at 7333 Hazeltine Boulevard. And I totally see where he's coming from. He's a big property. He's not going to have problems. But we, aren't so fortunate. Last weekend was a bachelor party. And even though the owner said it wasn't, it was just a staging area. They still had 10 cars there and 14 people. And, it was a hassle. My parents couldn't get up our driveway at one point. So I think some of those modifications you guys are making is good. So thank you for doing that. But we still are concerned that there should be some limits on daytime parking. So our neighbor's house is just a 4-bedroom. So, that's 10 people per the, overnight limit. But should, 20 people be there? Should 10 cars be up front? It's getting a little old, and it's every weekend. I think this is the 3rd or 4th bachelorette party, which the pictures and all that were posted. So I'm okay with exemptions and all that, but a couple questions. So how will residents like myself be made aware of overnight parking limits granted to the licensee if they do get an exemption? And then is there an appeal process where I can push back, or versus just going to your committee or to get instantly approved? Do I have a say to push back on some of those limits? And then also, is the homestead status going to be questioned too? Because I looked at our neighbor's house and they're renting it out, and it's still listed as a homestead. Well, it's clearly not. It's a commercial property in my eyes. So is the city going to go back and review the homestead status? Because, you guys should collect more tax revenue because they're, using more services. So those are just a couple of my comments. I see where they're coming from, but I think we're just trying to help all at Chanhassen, the more common people and the 3rd acre, normal houses, not the 2-acre lots. Because they're not going to get called in and have the problems. But, for folks like us, when we do have problems, what can we do? So I hope you take those considerations into account. Because it is getting old, so. If you have any questions for me?
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
We'll learn more about the last bachelorette party.
Yeah, the cutout and the cars. And
if this revised ordinance, as proposed tonight, were in place, speaking to the last bachelorette party, do you understand what recourse you would have?
I do. So one of the problems from that party, we actually complained to Airbnb, And they contacted, and said, hey, we're aware of this. And then when they checked out, the owner of the property got notified and said, hey, next time can you not notify them? I don't want, my site getting notified of this complaint because it's going to get a ding against me. But we're like, well, it's not my place to manage your property and all the cars. So he's asking us to go around the system, and we're like, no, not going to do that. So we're going to bring it up through you guys. But what I understand, yes, it's not the noise thing. It's the cars. It's the people. Do you really want 10 cars and 15, 20 people coming into your residential neighborhoods? Because if it starts here, it's going to spread. I never thought this house would rent out so much, but it's nonstop every night for the last 2 months. You got Prince's Estate, you got downtown Excelsior, you got the Arboretum, you got so many weddings. It's more and more demand. So they're rented out, so it's going to spread. It's going to become more of a problem into your cookie cutter neighborhoods where it's smaller houses, and we don't even have on-street parking. It's Highway 41, so they don't have any options. So it's either just our shared driveway, and they're just going to fill that thing to capacity, 10, 12, whatever it is. They say don't park on the grass. The grass is all gone because they park there, and it's just dirt now. So what are you going to do there? It's like, what's my recourse? I'll call it in, but it's just a nuisance.
I think maybe you misunderstood my question. So pretending that this ordinance is in place, let me hypothetically play this out, and you guys can nod your heads whether this is true or not. There was a bachelor party just the other night in this driveway we saw pictures of. I assume that these women did not just stay there for the day, they were there for the night.
3 nights.
3 nights of partying, that's right. 3 nights of pictures.
Well, they were staged.
Could have been sent. I want to make sure I understand. They would have violated what is being proposed as the nighttime limit for vehicles. You would then make that complaint to the city. That would be strike 1 against this homeowner. And 2 more times and their license would be revoked.
What is the nighttime limit?
Nighttime limit
Cars?
is the default nighttime limit is 2 plus available garage stalls. So
So it'd be 4 in this case. It's a 2-car garage plus 2, so it'd be 4 cars total.
Yeah, and without going too deep into the weeds, the service we're looking at to help us with this has a 24/7 number. So that would get texted in. It would then immediately shoot a text out to the Airbnb or the short-term rental owner saying, hey, this issue's been reported, deal with it, and tell us how you've dealt with it. And depending on that response, we may issue a strike, or if the response was extremely lackluster, we may just suspend the license at that point until they give us an improvement plan.
Sounds good to me. So I think that I'd be okay with that. I'm not. My wife is trying to shut it down. I'm trying to deal with it. I'd be okay if they had 4 cars out front. That'd be okay. Sure. If it was his property and they have 12, they're not going to have an issue. Yeah. But when there's 10 cars, 8 cars, I'm glad that the verbiage is in there. If it's blocked, I think that's great. The overnight, I'm okay with that. The daytime, I still think there need to be some balance. I really do. If it's 8 cars, 7 cars, why are they doing that? Probably a party. You're attracting a certain vibe by doing this, and I think we should try to limit that.
And for your specific property, and not to speak on that, I think the other thing that Mackenzie shared earlier was if they only have 4 cars during the day and they're blocking your access, they're also in violation.
Sure, yeah.
Right.
But with 4 cars, they shouldn't.
Sure.
And I'm not going to have a problem at that point.
Yeah. Okay.
But if they have 6, 8, it just grows and grows. And the party bus, so in a few of the pictures, you can see the Honda. We're physically parking it down there, so we block. Do I want to do that? No, but one of my options. So I appreciate you guys looking at this. I think there needs to be some verbiage. So thanks.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Come on.
So especially for his benefit, can you explain how if you require a license and then somebody doesn't follow the rules and then you take their license away, how you're going to actually get them to stop renting the house?
Yep. Yeah. So worst case scenario, we would have to go court order.
Okay.
Is the city prepared for that?
Yeah, I think the council is. They directed us this. We've talked through enforcement. One of the things staff brought up during the first couple times, in 2017, 2018 when this came up was the challenges of enforcing these ordinances when you have somebody who really doesn't want to cooperate. And the council's aware of that, and they directed staff to draft this ordinance and draft licensing, and I have to assume that means they're committed to following through on it.
So in terms of dealing with these infractions to document it, do I have to call it in and then that triggers, or is photo evidence going to be enough, sufficient? Hey, I got because I have outdoor cameras now.
So my understanding, and I don't want to go too far because I don't have the full vendor specs in front of me, is that you can text your complaint to the number and include photo documents, and I think they also have an online reporting where small videos and things like that can be included, and that goes into the record then. So if we do have to do court action, that becomes what I hand to my attorney, and I say, on this date, I have this video, I have this photo, I have this, these are the documented infractions, here's the letters. It's a lot of work, but
Sure.
it is something we will do.
Okay, so it's just not my word versus if I
Correct.
send in pictures that help. Okay.
Yeah, for the planning commission's benefit too. That was one of the reasons why we went with the vendor. We get more documentation. It saves us a lot of staff work trying to put a caseload, which when we do other projects where there's enforcement, it's a lot of front-end work. So that was one of the benefits we told the council of having this system, is the documentation is put in place that we can build that case quickly.
Also, I am not a 24/7 hotline.
Thanks.
Can you give us your start?
Since when? Great. Sir, if you'd please come to the mic.
Yeah, Mark's other neighbor. So once it's passed to an ordinance, if there's a problem, we go to the police. Correct? Or do we bring the problem to the city?
Yep. In this, so it always depends a little bit on the problem, right? Obviously, if it's a life safety issue, call 911, please. If it's a technical violation of an ordinance standard, like, for instance, the issue the Blisses have, and yourself as well, is you have a private drive.
Yep.
That limits law enforcement authority. So for a license violation, you should contact the hotline for the license violation, because that will let us use the license as an enforcement mechanism. Now, if they're being extremely loud, disorderly, things like that, certainly the Carver County non-emergency numbers are out to go, as they can respond to a noise nuisance, noise violation. I would also still report it to the city, so then we can hit them on both ends.
Okay, just wanted to clarify.
Yep.
If I may, planning commission, to part of this onboarding, we talked about this isn't going to go until January. We're going to spend some time putting a lot of information out to not only potential neighbors, so they know how to manage this, and also the vendors. So what the process would be, just as we explained here. Some of it's going to go through the sheriff's office, and some of it's going to go through the planning staff.
Clarification. It was brought up, the notification of permit exceptions. So Mark's my neighbor, he's got an Airbnb, and I'm thinking, well, yeah, you're gonna have these bachelorette parties. But so now I'm thinking, it's like, all right, I think I know what the rules are, but Mark's rules are different, because he went before your guys. Other than Mark telling me as his neighbor, is there a notification process where you send out to each of the two neighbors on each side of the property that says, you got a little different scenario here than the rest of the city does? How does that work?
There isn't. That's definitely something we can and probably should add.
You did a great job about talking about parking exceptions. We've got the garage, we've got the driveway, right? But if you think about what we've just talked about here, we're talking about driveway, we're talking about garage, we're talking about public street, we're talking about private streets, and we're talking about shared driveways, right? And he's got a scenario here where he's got a shared driveway, and I'm not exactly sure, and I'm not going to change this, but could the ordinance say, or the permit say, hey, guess what? Shared driveways you can't park on them. And I'm not saying to do that, but I think there's another thing to think about here, because like I said, we've really well covered 3 of the 5 things that I defined there. There's 2 that are a little bit fuzzy. So I'm just kind of curious on your thoughts here. And I'm not saying we're going to build it into whatever we're going to vote on tonight. I'm just thinking about, as you write your kind of final documents, how do you define those and what's tied into those?
Yeah, shared driveways are tough because they're governed by a private agreement. And so if, for instance, the private agreement says all parties have the right to park on it, I don't know for sure that I can override that. Again, it's really, we do the best we can. I cannot create an ordinance that perfectly touches everything.
Were you going to the place where you would say if you have a shared driveway, you would not be able to have a license?
Well, and I didn't, Mackenzie brought up a good point that there's an agreement there. I guess I didn't really think about it from that perspective. I mean, maybe you've got an agreement in place that says nobody can park there or anybody can park there or whatever.
Or you can't have a rental property kind of thing.
Yeah, so I mean, I was just curious because like I said, again, you're spot on, Mackenzie. It's not one size isn't a great fit for everything. I totally get that. And there's always going to be something that we didn't think about, but the definition of roads has been something that we've talked a lot about here tonight. So,
Sir, did you have a final comment?
Comment, I didn't see anything there about contacting neighbors. I thought maybe I saw something in a previous. How far out do you go?
Probably the same as what we do for proposed developments, would be my guess, 500 feet.
For the appeal?
No, he's talking about contacting. So what he just suggested that you just said that's a good add, he's asking how far out would you go? And my guess, not knowing, would be the same as we always go, which is 500 feet within the property. But that's up to you guys.
Yeah, that might be a little bit longer to choose.
Yeah.
We can fine tune that and bring it forward to the council as an idea.
I have one neighbor within 300 feet.
You're going to be so good with this ordinance when it's all done, I promise. All right, with that, I will close the public hearing portion and open it up for comments.
So as it stands, the fences for dogs is in the proposed ordinance, is that right?
I think I know where you're going. I think there are two things that are sort of duplicated or doubled up in here that I'm not sure need to be. And that's, it doesn't matter if you're a rental property or not. You can't just let the dogs run wild. And you can't just make all the noise you want. Now, sir, on your property, you can do both because nobody's going to complain. So the rules are in place, but if nobody complains about them, it's going to be perfectly fine. I don't feel the need to repeat those rules as part of this because you literally say in there, property must be in compliance with all state and local laws and regulations, which includes keeping your dogs on a leash and not violating the noise ordinance.
So I'd prefer it not be in there, I guess
Yeah,
is what I'm getting at.
I agree. I think we can strike numbers 2 and 6. Now, am I right? Is number 2 above and beyond existing ordinances?
Number 2 is
And I'm sorry, C2 is what I'm referring
C2
to,
is
yeah.
a restatement, essentially, of the city's noise nuisance ordinance. Staff's rationale was for things that we think are super important, like the noise ordinance. We felt it was justified to reiterate, to make sure it was front and center, that an outside entity who's not aware of the city ordinances had that just flashing red in their face, that this is something the city takes very seriously. Do I believe that logic holds for pets? Probably not to the same extent.
Yeah.
But that was staff's reasoning for duplicating it.
So to be clear, the duplication of 2 and 6 in there is more for the prevention based on the knowledge and education of the renter, because the rules don't change for the complainer. Whether it's in there or not,
Correct.
They can absolutely complain. Yes.
Correct.
Puts them on
6 is a little more onerous because obviously, like, you can have a dog in the city without a fence.
Yes. Yes. Got it. Okay. Does that help, Ryan?
I want to clarify. So 6 does not appear to require that a property have a fence in the yard in order to allow dogs on the property. It just says...
Apologies, that's B4, which I assume you would. B4 has that, if the short-term rental permits guests to bring dogs, a portion of the yard must be enclosed by suitable fencing.
Okay, yep, that's the one.
Yeah.
You're right. So
And
that's
6 is then leash, which, as has been pointed out, we already prohibit dogs from running at large.
right. So B2 subpoint Roman numeral 4 seems like overkill to me.
Mackenzie, if we're gonna keep number 4, do we wanna turn the word dogs into pets, given what we've got? I mean, there's a lot of people who have some pretty strange pets these days.
Especially at bachelor parties.
Mark's bachelor parties.
Hey, no.
So I was just curious, so maybe we should just make it a little bit more generic, so somebody doesn't come in with a pack of.
If the phrase is retained, that would be a good suggestion. If the phrase is struck, then our general animal ordinance would prevail.
Got it. Thank you.
Other comments, edits, suggestions? I'm a fan of not duplicating the stuff in here, so removing B2, 4 altogether. And appreciating the education component, but just removing C2 and C6. And I would expect at the time of licensing, property must be in compliance. We could point out to the licensee, noise and pets, if necessary, if we find that to be a problem. My assumption is 99% of these licensees are going to get their first strike and learn the hard way on noises and pets, and then it'll be done.
And we would certainly include that in the Good Neighbor brochure that we ask them to display.
There you go.
I would take it when somebody is issued a license and they sign it or sign something, there's gonna be some kind of clause in there that says, I fully understand and acknowledge all the city ordinances as it pertains to not only my rental property, but properties in general.
My intention would be, once we identify the properties, they'll get a letter telling them they need a license. That letter would include things like the city's nuisance ordinance and the parts of the ordinance they are expected to abide by. And yeah, I have not created the paperwork as of yet, but.
Quick question. So the fees that we're collecting from licenses, is that going to cover the administrative expense and the 24/7 service? So it's going to be a net zero. In other words, this isn't going to cost Chanhassen taxpayers money.
So one of the reasons why the fees weren't discussed here is because ultimately fees and budgets are outside the purview of this commission, and the council will determine the fee structure and how much of the cost they want to recoup. The council did discuss that a little bit, and I think their goal is to offset the majority of the administrative costs with fees, but they feel like this is a service to the citizens, and the numbers that were cited for the vendor they felt were probably acceptable for the benefit, even if we don't fully recoup.
I have a question. At what point is a rental property no longer a homesteaded property for tax purposes?
If you don't live there, it can't be homesteaded. The county is a little behind on their GIS updates, months and months behind. I strongly suspect the property is not actually still homesteaded, but the public-facing records have not yet been updated to reflect that, although I could be wrong. But
I can vouch for that, as I own rental properties in Chanhassen, and they are still classified as homesteaded, but the taxes are accurately reflected as to what their real status is. So, yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Thanks for covering half these fees for us. Okay. I am happy to offer a motion. The Chanhassen Planning Commission recommends that the City Council adopt the proposed amendment to Chapter 1 and Chapter 20 of the City Code concerning short-term rental licensing, striking sections B to 4 under license required, striking section C2 and C6 per duplication of the existing local laws and regulations. Do we have a second?
Second.
Percy, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion passes 6-0, and will go before City Council on October 14th? October 10th? No way. October 10th. October 10th, everybody watching at home at 10:30. Okay, thank you to all of you. And moving
Good luck to you.
quickly through our agenda, we will suspend the two training items, I-1 and I-2, for another time. Maybe get a quick city council update and an invitation to drink beer.
Yes, right. First, if you would approve the minutes, we got to note the minutes.
Would someone like to note the minutes?
So noted.
Thank you, sir.
I would just like to also note, while the Scribner tried to type, it was a lot of nuanced things that were hard to get all the engineering parts in there. So we did our best on those minutes. So I tried to proofread them, but it was difficult to go through that. So I appreciate you adopting those. So at the update for our next meeting on the 4th, we do not have any items scheduled. So we have published that we will be joining maybe some other commissions. So we can be at a quorum. So everybody's invited. I hope you all got that invitation. So welcome to come.
Myself and the boys from engineering are putting together a pretty strong team, so you're welcome to try.
It seems quite unfair.
Fair at all.
I mean,
Game on.
Can I be on your team?
Game on.
We have room for 2 more.
who developed the
Done.
questions?
Done. Me and my husband will be on your team.
I was afraid that they were going to ask like biomes or something that we would have to know. Right. All right, back to the subject at hand. So at the last city council meeting,
We play a whole different game, my friend.
at the last city council meeting, they approved the RSI Marine, and they also approved the Avienda project. They spent a lot of time, staff did, based on your comments, working with the developer. And District 3, which is that most southerly district adjacent to 212, which we were concerned about what the regional draw was there. So that was modified and approved by the city council. That says that's a 16-acre site. So that District 3 reads as such: the 10 acres, approximately 60% of the area in District 3 shall be developed as an amusement, recreation, entertainment use. The uses could include the golf entertainment, hockey rinks, indoor amusement parks, arcades, convention performance centers. And we also stated that the principal amusement use shall be constructed prior to the approval of any accessory uses. There was in the ordinance, there was an intent statement that it's the city's expectation that they spend some time trying to put that together. And if some time passes, maybe a number of years, and they said that market's not there, then they could go back to those subsequent uses. So I think that was a strong intent by the city council, and you had the same concerns that there still be that regional draw. So Avienda did concur with that. So those changes are in the ordinance. So with that, I think they're working right now on putting together the final plat for those townhomes. If anybody's been driving by, they are working feverishly on that. So that's that. So on the 18th, is that their next meeting?
Yep.
So the 18th, we do have one. We have the request for the. We're going to do a code amendment for our variances, and Mackenzie's written that already because he will be gone.
I'll be there for that one. I'll be back, but
back from your trip.
I'm working ahead as best I can.
So also that one, then we'll do the 2 training ones. I think the presentation that engineer Eric Hendrickson has, I think, is really good about the safety committee, because I know you hear a lot about the traffic and how they work through those. It's a good discussion. Then also kind of put the flow through a site plan agreement. I just want to see all the nuances so you understand all the different steps. I think there's a lot of lack of understanding of that kind of came out at our last meeting, of what we actually do through all those steps, kind of get to the big picture and then get to the very granular part of it. So I think that'd be helpful to kind of understand that. I know we talked about that of kind of onboarding, but now that you've been in some of those, you kind of can go back and kind of draw from that. So hopefully that will be a short meeting, but I wanted to get you out. Oh, I was trying to get you out of here before 10:30. Guess we can wrap up
I do have
quick.
a
So.
question, and maybe this can be part of the training. I think it might be good for us to review what the different steps of this meeting are and what our like role is in each step, because I think we've gotten a little combative during the public hearing portion, and I'm not even sure if we're supposed to be addressing the public, if they're just supposed to be giving us comments, and then we have our discussion, and when we ask staff questions, and I think maybe we could like.
I can whip up a quick Robert's Rules refresher if that's what you want.
Yeah, or I can do that too.
Or
Just
Kate
kinda,
can, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good comment, because we did have that. That's some of that's in your onboarding handbook. I think sometimes it gets kind of casual, and I think, I appreciate you tonight, just when things kind of maintain decorum. It's always helpful for everybody, but I think that's a good point too. And also people getting up and down, up and down, up and down. So, yeah, I think that's kind of maybe formalize that, so. But good comments tonight, so I appreciate everybody's input on all that. We've had a couple long meetings, but appreciate that. So we'll see you in 2 weeks at a different location.
That's right.
At the brewery.
Right.
We'll be there.
Well, I formally would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
I
Aye. We are adjourned.